looking on my, oh, I see Brent.
And Chair
I'm here,
Moss.
Kristen.
I'm here. Okay.
Yeah, you have a quorum now.
Okay, great. Well, then let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our September edition of our Finance Committee. My name is Kristen Norton. I represent District 15 from Southern Utah. And if we could start, if Vice Chair Davis is on, if she'd like to introduce herself, and then we could have each of the committee members introduce themselves. Okay, not seeing her. Let's move on then to State Board of Education Chair James Moss.
Hello, Jim Moss, District 12.
Welcome. How about Board Member Straight? Hey, and how about Board Member Bogus?
Thought we had a quorum. Who did you see, Scott? Was there somebody else?
Board Member Straight is signed in, but he's just not responding.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
it was you, Chair Moss, of course, you know, Chair Norton, and then I saw Board Member Straight's icon, but
Yeah, I can still see that. He maybe
Right.
had to step away for a minute.
I'm here, I'm driving.
Okay,
okay.
great. Sorry about that, Board Member Straight. We'll just remember that as you're responding. Okay. As I last got updated, we do not have anyone here for public comment, which is item 3.1. So we will move on to our committee agenda, item 3.2, which is an action item. This has to deal with R277-113, the LEA fiscal and auditing policies. It's an amendment. And apparently we have Director Ben Rasmussen to lead us in this.
Thank you, Chair. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. It's good to be with you this morning. The rule that I have for you is R277-113, as you indicated, Chair. So the little background on this is this comes as a result of some legislation during the 2023 legislative session. The legislature authorized LEAs to be able to transfer funds from their state restricted programs in response to changing student needs. And then they directed the board to make rules as to how that should be implemented. And so in the rule, R277-113, and we're looking at draft 2 is the current draft that we're asking the board to look at. If you go to line 444, that's where you'll see the bulk of the new language. Basically, we've added a new section that talks about the reporting requirements and the considerations involved and what funds are eligible. We've identified that the superintendent or staff will publish a list that addresses what funds are eligible for these reallocations. So we are happy to answer questions you have about this language. I will point out that the difference between draft 2 is we got some feedback that the rule still contains some old language containing the term FASB, which as I understand is no longer used by LEAs. And so my direction was to delete the references to FASB. And so that was taken out in draft 2. And so we're asking that you pass out draft 2, which has those changes.
Wonderful. And I do see a hand from Chair Moss. Go ahead, Chair Moss.
Thanks. So Ben, just a couple questions, because we had this come up, I guess it's been a year. And initially we had a few things that we dialed back because it was fairly prescriptive in our kind of upfront review of proposed reallocation. And we turned it more from kind of an upfront review to a back-end reporting, which I think part of this is reporting the transaction and adjust the entries. I have one question. The purpose for a couple of these, 455, refunding to the state restricted program from which the original transfer initiated. So that's not refunding to the state. That just means if you don't use it, you send it back to where you pulled it from. Is that correct?
That's how I read that, yes.
Okay, and I wasn't sure at
Correct.
first if it was sending the money to the state as if kind of for some other use, but if that's the idea, just I understand that if you didn't. So then you would be able to do it at the end of the next year if you wanted to, but you wouldn't be able to maintain it in that program. Is that, can you just tell me the purpose for that? If they use the flexible allocation provision to put money into a different program, why couldn't they hang on to that money for the following year in that program?
I would probably defer to Deputy Jones or Director Uri on that question.
Madam Chair, will you recognize Director Uri, please?
Yes, thank you, Director Yuri. We appreciate your input.
Okay, can you hear me there?
Yes,
Yeah.
There you are.
Apologies, Chair Moss. I had a minor audio issue. Can you repeat your question for me?
The question was in lines 455, when it's, I think what we're looking at here is if you use the flexible allocation provision under the statute to redirect money from one restricted program to some other priority, and that would be through the community council principle, all the other, requirements of that statute. Why couldn't you keep the money in that program to carry over for the next year? Why would they need to put it back in the program they directed it from? What would be the downside to allowing them to hold it? Because I assume sometimes you'll redirect some money and then, not quite need all of it, but you might want to keep it in that program for the next year. Is there a legal reason they'd have to send it back?
So, thank you for clarifying the question. I believe I understand it. And Sam Uri, School Finance Director, and Chair Norton, if I may respond.
yes, thank you.
Okay, so we across the system do have an issue with carryover balances already. And so what we want to avoid, and the reason for putting this in the rule, was that we don't want to have them, possibly transfer a carryover balance or funds from one program to another and then just let it sit there and create new carryover balances. So,
Got it.
solve one problem in one program and then create a new problem in another program. And so
Got it. Okay.
that's the reasoning behind that, is just so that if we are making these transfers, that we're expending those transfers and not creating carryover balances.
Okay, so it was
other
a general
programs.
carryover concern more than a program specific or anything.
Correct.
That makes sense. And so they could redirect it the following year and perhaps direct less because they found the need was not quite what they anticipated or whatever. Okay, so it wouldn't really restrict their ability to use the flexibility. It's just kind of clear it out, start over, see if you want to make the same. Okay. And
Exactly.
Chair, I have another question, but I can wait if there's others. I had a question on the next section as well, but
No, go ahead, Chair Moss, and then I have a question, but I will go after you. Thank you.
okay. Another one. Oh, maybe there is somebody else.
Please accept my apologies. I just don't see on the document on the screen if we are on one draft one or draft two.
Draft two,
Thank you, ma'am. I apologize for the interruption.
no problem. We're glad we could catch you up.
So another thing that we tweaked the first time this rule came up was to make clear there were not specific requirements that I think the initial rule was something to the effect that they had to confirm that there would be no adverse effect on the program from which they were pulling the money. And that seemed like a little bit tough to predict. The idea was they would report if they had some adverse effect, but they would have to make sure they didn't divert money if that violated state or federal law. And so I think that was in the rule, was you cannot, do something that would violate a flat kind of floor. To the extent that there's any state required or federal required floor, you can't violate that, but otherwise you can, use this flexibility. And so I'm curious, it looks like, Part E includes that, other state or federal requirements on restricted funding. I'm not sure what these others mean. I know what maintenance of effort is under federal requirements. but things like program-specific effort, matching, and equity, I'm just not sure what those are, and I'd be concerned if those create more restriction than the statute intended in being able to reapply that, or redirect with flexibility. I just don't know what matching or equity are. Could you, I mean, I know what the words mean, but they've got so many meanings. What does that mean in this setting, and how would it restrict them more than, Part E would?
Chair Norton,
Yeah.
Scott. So to answer through you, Madam Chair, to answer Chair Moss's question. So specifically, so maintenance of effort, the best way I can explain it, and Sam and or Deborah can correct me, or maybe more clearly define this. The concern was, and the concern from some of the business administrators was if you unrestrict special education money and you use, and it becomes unrestricted state money, and your expenditure levels on the program rise, then technically you're beholden by the federal government to sustain that level of expenditure of state money as a maintenance of effort requirement. Does that make sense? Let me just pause there and see if Sam. Yeah. And so, go ahead, sir.
I think I get the federal maintenance of effort requirement, Part A, and I get Part E. If there's another state or federal requirement on restricted funding, that's what we talked about the last time the rule came up. If there's a flat floor out there, right, then you got to respect that. And we incorporate that into the rule. It's the three in the middle that I'm not sure, and that create to me the potential to have a restricted, effect on schools that goes beyond those flat minimums and things like maintenance of effort. I just don't know what that means. Program specific effort, matching, and equity. They seem loose and the type of thing that might create a restriction, or at least the appearance of restriction on the ability to, redirect that money where the community council and the principal, think it fits best. So those are the three I'm unsure about.
Okay. All right, I see. So Madam Chair, just real quick, and then I know Sam has his hand raised. So B, what we were trying to do here with A, B, C, D, E is to make sure that we were covering any and all requirements related to it, because it may not be just special education restricted funding they unrestrict. It may be other restricted funding that does have a program specific effort requirement to it. Or it might be a program that is restricted that has a matching requirement to it. So all we were saying is that, hey, look, when you unrestrict money, make sure, right, that you're not violating any of these A, B, C, D, if there's, that you're still promoting equity, that if there is a matching requirement, that you're not going to violate that. If there is or any other state or federal requirements on restricted funding, they were intended to make sure that we were, ensuring that we were communicating with them that, look, don't put yourself in an audit situation where you unrestrict this money and then you become, you're violating some kind of matching principle for that particular program, because there are so many restricted programs. And each one of them may have different requirements along the lines of matching, MOE, all those pieces and parts there. So that's really what the intent is here, sir. Is not to try to be more restrictive, but just to make sure that they're conscientious of, make sure what funding you're unrestricting, and that you're conscientious about what the program or funding you're using requires, and that you don't violate any of those. That's the intent there. Over.
I may have an amendment, but I know CD's got a hand up. I mean, my thought is maybe B, C, and D flow from E. It's other federal state requirements on restricted funding, including requirements related to program specific effort. Equity.
Right.
I mean, equity has such a broad term that it's like, well, does that mean I have to keep this equal to that? And I think the intent of the initial rule, as we worked through it, was to tie it to specific state restrictions. Just make sure, folks, that as you do this, like you say, you don't find yourself in a non-compliance or audit situation. And so maybe we can just be more specific about that. But
okay, sir.
I'll wait for Cindy and maybe come back with an amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sam, did you have an additional comment you wanted to make?
I believe Deputy Jones summed it up really well. Just and definitely would be open to an amendment, to clarify this a little bit. Just wanted to add that, equity in this sense could be just equity between campuses or schools in an LEA. So it really was intended kind of as a catch-all to just ensure that LEAs are aware that they can't, by unrestricting these funds, avoid some of the federal requirements that still exist. So.
Thank you.
A lot of the things that I had in my question have been addressed, but I look at this from the other side of the lens, and that I am concerned that this may even be too flexible. I see that there are great needs in special education, and then here we are taking money out of the special education fund, likely. And the costs in CTE are so high for the equipment and the technology, et cetera, that is changing so rapidly. And we're looking that, we're going to free up that money. And so I look at it, it's like, where are the guardrails? Because I don't want to hear that we've been taking money out of these accounts and then next year they come back and yep, special ed needs more money. And so I look at it totally from the other side of this. I'm feeling better with the explanation on these 5 different things that you have listed here for, as warning signs to BAs that, hey, make sure that all of these requirements are still being met, because, this is not free money, and it does have many restrictions, and rightly so. So I appreciate the discussion that you just had, and I would be not so likely to be one that would approve of saying let's release some of these or loosen up some of these ideas. Vice Chair Davis, welcome to our meeting this morning, and I see you have a hand.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I was having a technical difficulties, wanted me to use SSO and some other things. I was like, what is going on? I'm probably going to move that we pass this as is, because the language here, I think, is specific to the requirements in code. And it is pretty specific on lines 460 and 461, federal maintenance of effort requirements, which we know exist, and then program specific effort. Maybe it'd be helpful to put, in code, but it is in code. These are some of the things that are included, and I appreciate that they put on line 464, other state and federal requirements on restricted funding, because there may be some in addition to matching equity or other, or something else. So I don't think it's a nebulous concept. I think it's the things that are specific to whatever program they're taking from. I do think it's interesting that when you look at the below the line items, especially a lot of these now are coming in grant form. And so it's really tricky because you can't apply for a grant for, A, B, and C, and then take that money and use it for something else. So the legislature might need to get clear on either doing less things in grant form and just taking those dollars and spreading them across every LEA for whatever purpose they want, or just understanding that the more we do that type of funding, it really is leaving like special ed and CTE. I mean, very few pots you can sort of rob Peter to pay Paul. Anyway, I move that the committee approves R277-113 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you. Chair Moss.
Well, I guess I'll make an amendment to the motion then. That's what I indicated earlier. I appreciate the explanation for each of those. I think it's just important to make clear that what we're talking about here when we say these things are the requirements of code, and not, these are terms that could be interpreted in a lot of different ways. So my proposed amendment to the motion would be that after E, So we amend line E to say, line 464. Other state or federal requirements on restricted funding, comma, including requirements related to program-specific effort, matching, or equity, so that we tether those to the requirements of state law, which I think is the intent. It would just make clear that that's what we're protecting them from. I don't know if I can mark that up or if it's kind of clear. It basically just keeps them all and puts them at the end of E.
Tammy, do you want to give me the screen so I can put that up there? Let's see. Can you repeat that, Chair Moss?
Sure, yeah, it basically just takes line E and leaves it as is, but then brings in B, C, and D. So maybe I can read it back. It keeps everything. It just kind of orders it, makes clear what it means. So
What was the language you wanted to add, including?
So yeah, including provisions related to, or excuse me, including requirements related to program-specific effort, comma, matching, and equity. Let me see, I'm looking at my own. Yeah, so it would be a catch-all, like, so line E is basically any requirements that are out there. Other state or federal requirements on restricted funding. So that's good catch-all language. And then it would highlight those three specifics that were called out in the draft for special attention, including, yeah, program-specific effort, matching, or equity. That captures it. I think that kind of makes clear the concern that you make sure that you don't cross those lines. And here are three specifically you need to pay attention to. And look at what the statutes say, the code says about matching and equity and specific program effort. Then they're not wondering, well, what does that mean, equity? I can't do anything that I think is inequitable. No, you have to pay attention to the statutes on these elements to make sure you don't cross a line there. Yeah, that captures it. Thanks, Ben.
Hey, Member Bogus, welcome to our meeting this morning. And you have a question or comment. Go ahead.
I do, ma'am. Thank you so much. So with regard to specifically the amendment on the table, as I look into the code line, I don't see equity listed there. And so I'm wondering, and I also don't see matching listed there. And I'm specifically looking at 53F-2-209. And so maybe we read a lot of stuff, so I very well could have missed it, but I'm just wondering if we're keeping things consistent with that code line, why those things are necessary at all. And could someone answer that for me, please?
Would that be you, Director Rasmussen?
So I think what you're looking at there is the code has given the board the authority to set the parameters and to kind of articulate the things that they haven't put in code. So I don't think the board is limited to the specific principles that are articulated in the code, because the code has given the board rulemaking authority to talk about what the LEAs should look at as they're working on this.
And so what did you, go ahead. What did you look at to come up with these? Are there program specific, is there program specific language where you pulled this information?
Director Uri, I think, would be the one to answer that specifically.
Go ahead, Director Uri. Would you mind answering that?
Sure. Really, this whole section is really a reminder for LEAs and a guidance for LEAs to say, we don't know at this point in time what state programs will be created in the next legislative session. But just be aware that any program that you unrestrict there may be repercussions for, unrestricting that program. In this case of special education, right? We know that that's maintenance of effort. we look at maintenance of equity as kind of an overall thing that we've been looking at with COVID funding and things like that. But it really is more guidance and more cautioning LEAs to be aware of any program specific items that may exist. And so these things that we've pulled in, program specific effort, matching, or equity, are elements that exist in some of the existing programs. We can't possibly quantify every stipulation in the rule, but really it's guidance, and it's just making sure LEAs are aware of maybe the risks or the repercussions if they choose to unrestrict funding.
Wow, we have got a slew of hands. Did I answer your question, Member Vargas?
It does. I may have an amendment as well. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Member Davis.
Thanks. I like this amendment because I like the word including. And so it doesn't limit the LEAs just to looking at matching and equity requirements in the code. I mean, there could be others like Director Yuri said that could come in the future, or Deputy Jones. I can't remember which one now said it. I would say that when you look at this and you're looking, there is some code that is created for example, the matching usually comes in grants, but the equity often can come in things that aren't grants. And it just came recently by the legislature in weighting the WPU for an extra weight for English language learners. Now, LEAs can say, I'm going to take that money and not use it for English language learners. I'm going to use it for general ed. And then what does that look like in an audit for us? I don't know. This is brand new. And so I think the legislature may need to get a little more clear in what they're expecting and allowing, but they have set certain parameters around special ed money for English language learners, things like that. So I just think our LEAs are going to be wise to say, can we show we're still meeting needs as required by this funding originally, and yet we can still move some of it to these other purposes. I just think this is wise, and I'll support the amendment. I like the word including. A question for Chair Norton. Can Chair Moss address, is he saying that we delete the lines preceding this? And so this is kind of, instead of that list itemized, it would just be federal maintenance of effort requirements, and program specific requirements, including matching, equity, blah, blah, blah. Because why would we put those in a list and then put 464 as amended? It would just be repetitious.
Chair Moss, would you like to respond to that? And I see Deputy Superintendent Jones's hand up, and I don't know if he needs to interject now, or if we should wait till after we hear Chair Moss's comment.
I'd be happy to wait for.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Sorry.
He's going to wait for you, Deputy Jones.
We're both waiting. All right. Here, my intent, and I'm happy to adjust, but what was to sort of capture all of this, but just sort of fit it together so that it would say federal maintenance of effort requirements, which we understand, and those are that's a specific and very critical element. And then it would say on 464, other state or federal requirements on restricted funding, comma, including program specific effort, matching, and equity. And which to my view, I think, like Vice Chair Davis pointed out, there's the broad statement. You've got to make sure you meet any other state or federal requirements on restricted funding. And then it calls out for attention those three that were already listed in the draft, which I think are good to point out. And I would say to Member Bogus's comment, I think it would be nice to list every code here, but I don't think this is meant to tether it to a specific code, but rather to call out those areas of protection and restriction that BAs need to pay special attention to, right? And so equity, we have maintenance of equity requirements now under federal law. And those might change, they might come and go, but this is something they need to be careful in paying attention to. Same with matching. I think I appreciate, Sam's explanation. And so that's the intent, Member Davis or Vice Chair Davis, is that it would say other state or federal requirements on restricted funding, including these three.
Okay, so it would not delete. It
No.
would just, okay, perfect. That's fine. I'm fine either way. I just wanted to know.
Okay, Board Member Bogus.
Thank you, ma'am. So I'm listening and I guess maybe I'm hearing wrong, but Board Member Moss or Chair Moss, are you wanting to strike those three in the middle? Because as it's written, it seems repetitive to me, and maybe I missed that, but it seemed like you said that you wanted to and then you didn't want to.
Can I respond, Chair?
Yes, please.
No, we're just moving them. And so maybe I should be more specific. It would be striking lines 461 to 463, but taking that language and putting it at the end of 464.
That is what I thought you said, and then I thought you said you didn't want to do that. So
Sorry.
I
that's
think we
probably
just
me.
need to go back to the draft so that that's clear. And maybe that is what Board Member Davis, Vice Chair Davis was also articulating, that B, C, and D there would then be struck.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful clarification. I meant to just move them, and so probably should have been more specific. Strike them here and add them there.
And I think that's fine. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And now I see no hands, so let's go ahead, and we have a motion on the floor. We have an amendment on the floor. Let's vote on the amendment first, if we could have that up. So Board Member Moss's motion is that the committee amend draft 2, striking lines 461 through 463, and amending line 464 to add, including requirements related to program-specific effort, matching, and equity. Board members, go ahead and please vote. Okay, and looks like that is unanimous. Okay, so right now let's go to the main motion. That motion made by Vice Chair Davis is that the committee approves R277-113 draft 2. We'll make that now as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Go ahead and please vote. And can you see Member Straight's vote?
I'll show it's unanimous.
Okay, that is unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to go first.
We appreciate you. All right, our second item on, we appreciate you, Director Rasmussen, very much. Thanks for leading us through that. Okay, agenda item 3.3 is an informational item. It's a recognition of progress, achievement, and improvements. I'll start off with Deputy Superintendent Jones, and he will walk us through these. We've got a couple of different subsections below here.
Right. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. So if we could start with, well, I guess it'll be item number 1 for recognition is the GFOA letter or result letter. So if you'd recognize Director Yuri to give background on this, any opportunity we get to recognize our LEAs for outstanding work in the financial processes and overall funds control and management, we take. And we wanted to just make sure that we provided you all with, and the public, with what we deem is appropriate and timely recognition of these districts, especially with the announcement from Beaver County School District. So if you'd recognize Director Uri, he can walk us through the GFOA, what it means to us, and recognize these districts accordingly and appropriately, ma'am.
That's wonderful, because I also know that awards in finance are few and far between in accounting. So thank you. And yes, go ahead, Sam, let's hear.
Yeah, thank you. We wanted to congratulate the Beaver School District and their business administrator, Todd Burke, was kind enough to send over these awards that his district received. So if we can open the file that says 2122 BCSD ACFR, the board members, so annual comprehensive financial report is what we call the ACFR. And so this is what the award is for. Both of these awards from both the Government Finance Officers Association and the International Association of School Business Officials have awarded Beaver School District these recognitions for their great work in compiling their annual comprehensive financial report. If we can scroll just a couple pages down, you know, some of these things are not required by code or rule, but they're nice to have, and it's been formatted in a pleasing format. All of our school districts and charter schools prepare their annual financial statements, but not all of them receive these awards or even take the time to apply for these awards. I will note that some of these awards aren't, all of the school districts haven't been awarded yet, and so for the fiscal year 22. So once we get the finalized list from these associations, we'll recognize all the school districts that received these awards, but really wanted to highlight Beaver and thank them for sending these over for us. If we can, let's see. So, just a lot of information there, but if we can click on the GFOA, the number 1 attachment, GFOA result letter. So again, this is the Government Finance Officers Association. A good number of staff here at at USBE are members of GFOA. They put on really good trainings. But we again just want to pass on that congratulations to Todd Burke and Beaver School District for their great work here.
That is wonderful. And that is a lot of work. And you can tell they really did strive for excellence. They weren't just striving to check the boxes, but wow. Great work.
Is Beaver with us? Just sorry to jump in.
No, they're not here this time. We could possibly have them at next month's Finance Committee meeting and recognize them there, but
Just curious.
Great group of folks.
looks like Member Bogus may have a.
Yes, Member Bogus.
Yes, I don't know if this is for Director Uri or not, but I'm wondering, does the state office send out at the very least an acknowledgement of something like this? Is there going to be correspondence coming from our agency or from the board itself acknowledging this in written form?
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
So, Madam Chair, to Board Member Bogus's question, we weren't planning on that, but we can certainly, do that if the Finance Committee members recommend that. I don't think there's any action that's required. We felt strongly, though, that any opportunity we get, we want to publicly recognize. I do want to just emphasize, too, that there are other districts, and Sam can correct me if I'm wrong on this too, that GFOA recognizes as well. So not just Beaver County School District. So then to Chair Moss's question, the plan is to make sure that we get those other ones that are identified, and then follow up in your October meeting. Because what happens is they're not all recognized, I guess, for lack of a better term, at once. There's the, obviously GFOA needs to look at their financial statements. So we just really wanted to get first and foremost out to the recognition of Beaver County School District, and then prompt this kind of input from board members like Board Member Bogus is bringing. So if the committee feels like, we should not only recognize them publicly like we did today, and that we will the other ones next month as part of this agenda item, to recognize them in writing or things like that, we'll certainly do that. So this is relatively new, but again, it's just one way of our trying to ensure that you and the public know that there's great things happening out there in the financial world by our districts and charter schools. So,
I also think it provides an opportunity for the board member in that area or other board members to individually make notice of those awards as well. Did that answer your question, Member Bogus?
It does answer my question. I don't know how one would approach that, Chair, but I think something like this would warrant, maybe not I don't know if one wants to say congratulations, but an acknowledgement. We see what you're doing. It's good. It's high level, and we want to congratulate you. I don't know if that would need a motion, or if that can be a consensus that Superintendent Jones could do that. I don't know what that would look like, ma'am.
Looks like he says, got it.
we got it.
Okay, back to you, Sam.
I just wanted to mention as well that our school finance specialists, led by John Palmer, and his team, review all of the annual financial reports from all of the school districts and charter schools already. I do like the idea of recognizing those that have received rewards, but they do review those and touch base with the districts and charter schools. And if there are some findings and some things that need to be corrected, they address those as well. So, but definitely love that idea of further recognizing or acknowledging the awards. So.
Yeah, and if there's anything that we can do that you would like us to add on, we are very open to that. We'll just leave that to your discretion, and you let us know where our assistance is needed or wanted. Okay.
So ma'am, at your direction, we can move to 3.1.
Thank you.
3.1 is the program monthly report on the Utah grants. If you and the committee members will recall, we do deeper dives on Utah grants and the Utah Schools Information Management System each quarter. Last month, which, the board doesn't meet in July. So last month in August, we did the deeper dive on the USIMS. So this month is the deeper dive on the Utah grants system. And just as background on this, there was some great feedback as part of the reporting and requirements work group or task force that came on, hey, there's a lot of room and for improvements in Utah grants. We're listening. We want to make sure that our systems are as supportive as possible to our LEAs. So at this time, Madam Chair, if you'd recognize grants manager Rebecca Nielsen, she'll do the deeper dive this month on the Utah grant system and the improvements that are being made on a perpetual basis in the interest of listening and recognizing the need to support our LEAs to the fullest extent possible with good systems.
Great. Yes, we would love to recognize Rebecca and appreciate her time with us. Go ahead, Manager Nelson.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate you having me. Cami, can I take control of the screen? Or yeah, whoever has it. Thank you. Let me share my presentation. Can you see the Utah grants slide?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay, thank you for having me. I appreciate you having me with your committee quarterly. I'm really excited about this month's updates. There's been a lot happening over the summer, so I'm excited to show you what's happening. So as a brief overview, what we're going to go through today is just to recap quickly on what is Utah Grants, go through some metrics that have been updated with 2023 data, look at some financial information, and then talk more in depth on the plan for development in this coming fiscal year. So just as a reminder, Utah Grants is an integrated system, whereas previously we were coming from various different systems that is transparent, comprehensive, standardized, and compliant. We have kind of hung our coat on that compliant element. It's been really important to us to gain compliance across the agency with our grants management, and feel that Utah Grants has made great efforts and strides in bringing us into compliance with grants management. So we're really happy with that and continue to work to improve on each of those elements. Also, this is a cradle to grave grant system. So we're beginning from our program funding all the way through awards, payments, and closeout. It's a cloud-based system that is customized specifically for the State Board of Education, built on the Salesforce platform. Also, thank you for approving the contract with REI during yesterday's board meeting. I understand that came before the board and was approved. We'll be signing off on that contract here shortly and be able to start our development in our 2024 development plan. So thank you for approving that ongoing contract with REI Systems, who is our vendor. Moving on to some of our metrics, wanted to show you year over year the number of grants that are processed in the Utah Grants Management System. You'll notice that we had an increase in 2023 of about 170 grants, but the mix is what's kind of interesting here. You can see that the top line is our federal awards. Those numbers of new awards are going down significantly, and that's as a result of the COVID funding. So we saw an increase in 21, 22, and now we're starting to get back into kind of a more norm range with our federal funding specifically. Also wanted to point out the number of payments that are processed in the Utah Grants Management System each year. And again, a year over year snapshot I thought was helpful. The piece that I want to point out here is the element in red. These are batch payments. So these are payments that are run through only USBE interface with the Utah Grants Management System. Essentially, we load payments and issue them out in a batch. They don't require LEA input at all. There's a significant number of payments that are processed each month and each year that are automated through the Utah Grants Management System that require very little interaction or input from individuals at the agency, and no input from the LEAs. So that's a significant lift of the system, and one that we are continue to be grateful that the system is managing that very, very well. I want to point out the costs of the Utah Grants Management System. It's not a free system. As you can see, the orange line indicates the development work, whereas the red line indicates licensing costs. So licensing costs have gone up year over year, but pretty much maintained steady from 2020 through 2024. We expect that to continue at roughly that same rate. What's been changing over time is the development costs in orange. During the beginning was very, very high, kind of leveled out the last couple of years as we've just been maintaining. And now we're excited to be going back into a new development phase with the new contract that was signed in fiscal year 2024. Okay, going into this, some of this is a repeat because we've had this planned and in the works for quite some time, but now we're excited to actually be able to jump in. So this work has been led primarily by Darren Nilsson in our office, and we began talking with REI about 9 months ago on seeing if they could help us with this project. Essentially what we're looking to do is incorporate our Utah Continuous Improvement Plan in the Utah Grants Management System to help us to gain increased integration and be able to talk more effectively through programs and be able to collaborate and reduce the burden on the LEAs. Some of the key benefits of the new continuous improvement plan, it will help LEAs to target funding to specific needs. It will reduce time and burden, increase collaboration, reduce duplication of effort, increase transparency, and create a process and plan that could be used for future legislative initiatives, and accelerate continuous improvement for all LEAs. The core elements that are included would be our integration with comprehensive needs assessment. So this would reduce the need for LEAs to enter information into the continuous needs assessment tool and into Utah grants, because they'll be fully integrated. We're going to be combining required elements. So if a grant requires you to upload board minutes, we'll be able to do that just once and not 4 times across 4 different programs. We'll be able to budget based on preliminary budget allocations, which will help our LEAs to establish cultures of processes where we fund the plan rather than plan the funds. It will contain elements that the USBE needs for a substantially approvable application. That means we'll be able to approve funding sooner. It will include both LEA and USBE approvals, and it will integrate throughout the life cycle of the grant system. So it will go beyond just the application stage, but throughout the life cycle of the funding. So as funding amounts change or requirements change, you'll be able to do that all in one place and have that talk across the multiple stages of the life cycle. Some additional elements that we're going to be adding with the development would be some collaboration functionality. What this looks like within the system is kind of like a chat functionality. We'll be able to chat both with people within our LEAs, where the LEAs will be able to talk with each other within the LEA, and they'll be able to talk to USBE program managers directly in the application. So if they have a specific question related to that, they'll be able to do that directly in Utah Grants and point out where the questions are and chat back and forth and be able to contain some of those communications historically. There's a snapshot comparison tool. This will help our USBE reviewers to look at previous versions versus current versions and be able to compare more effectively. One that I'm really excited about is streamlining transfers between programs. So for example, LEAs have the ability to say we want to use Title II funds for the purpose of Title I. Right now we have them waive an application for Title II, and then they have to go in and have 2 applications for Title I, one from Title I, one from Title II, but effectively they're spending the money all on Title I, but they've got 2 programs. Those are now going to be combined so that the funding is still tracked the way we need it to. We need to be able to track that for reporting to the federal government. But from an LEA view, they'll be able to say, hey, I'm doing Title I work, and that will all be contained in the same place. We're going to improve records ownership and sharing so that you don't have to call the help desk and say, hey, we need to switch the owner of this application. We'll be able to do that at the LEA level. Improve the revision process and increase transparency. We will be adding some new reporting tools, including Tableau, adding some additional forms. We will continue to use Qualtrics for a lot of our data collection and continue to integrate with that. But we will also be adding some forms directly in Utah Grants where we can that will eliminate the need for as many Qualtrics surveys. We will also be improving the budgeting for our indirect costs, where that becomes problematic when we have multiple fiscal years involved and indirect costs change over time. So we'll be making some changes there. So that's it as far as the development. We will be getting the band back together, so to speak, with pulling together an LEA group and a USBE super user group as we look at this development so that we can make sure that the development is meeting all of the needs of all of the users. And so that's going to be happening within the next month. We'll be pulling those groups together and working directly with our vendor to make sure that this new development plan is customized and exactly what USBE needs. And I think I see a hand, but essentially the last of the initiatives are kind of ongoing, so I will turn the time back to you.
Thank you so very much. We appreciate that information. And Manager Nelson, I would imagine that you're going to have the biggest fan club in the state of Utah. I heard a lot of work reduction going on that's going to make things so much nicer for our LEAs. So thank you. Thank you. I do see a hand from Member Davis. Member Davis, go ahead.
Yeah, I really just have one comment. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. I think this has been a while in coming, and I think it'll really be appreciated by people, especially the links straight in Utah grants to get to the other Qualtrics surveys and other platforms that they need to use. But so it's not like hunting around for lots of different places. And I think they had some other requests like having a pre-fill when they don't, so they don't have to fill out all their personal info every time they go in, things like that. But I'm sure some of those details will get kind of fleshed out as the work continues and progresses. And I just put a little shout out to Chair Norton, if hopefully this is acceptable to Member Straight, and Chair Moss and I work with the reports and requirements task force, but this presentation would be great to add on an agenda so that task force can hear and see the progress, which largely has come from their feedback as district and charter LEAs. So thanks so much for presenting.
Thank
That
you.
was a wonderful idea, because that's what I was just thinking. This is IT at its best. This is what we wanted these programs to be able to do. And woo. So yeah, and I think to let them see that their committee work is not falling on deaf ears is a great idea. Okay. Back to you, Deputy Superintendent Jones.
Madam Chair, if we could just check in with Cammie. Cammie, have we covered everything in 3.3? Or yeah, 3.3. I didn't miss anything, did I?
The only other thing is the PMR for USIMS, but we don't have a presentation this month on that.
Right, so we don't have the deeper dive, but the PMR is in the backups, Madam Chair, for you and the Finance Committee members, board members, and the public. We update that every month, and so that's available as well. So with
More and more of those circles are getting filled in.
yes, ma'am. So with that concludes 3.3. At your direction, ma'am, we can move to 3.4. I think, yeah, 3.4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Request for data.
Let's see. Yeah, so Madam Chair and committee members, 3.4 is an information item. It is a perpetual item in the sense that we track and follow up with you on any request for data and information. We have 2 this month, so if we could go to, let's see, 3.4. The Utah, well, so there's 2 of them, both by Member Boggess. So Madam Chair, Member Boggess had asked for clarification on the presentation under the Student Achievement Backpack piece. And my understanding, and if we could just check with her through you, Madam Chair, it was tied into yesterday's discussion in board meeting, or concerns with that particular rule with the Student Achievement Backpack. So if we could just check in with her and see if she needs any other data and information, or if we, miss something there, that would be great. But we always want to make sure we follow up on board member requests. So if we could check that first, please.
Okay, Member Boggess?
Yes, ma'am. So I met with staff, and I think we have an ongoing thing to address concerns and information, and I just appreciate their efforts. Thank you.
Okay. And then Madam Chair, at your direction, the next one was also a request for data and or information was from Member Boggess. It was related to details on the workload increase related to misinformation from the Utah Fits All Scholarship and how we were approaching or fixing it. So if you'll open up the backup in there, I think, are you driving, Cammie? Who's driving?
I am, sir.
Yeah. So here, this is intended just to summarize, what occurred related to that. It is specific to her request for follow-up. So if we could just review that, and and Madam Chair, if you could check with Board Member Boggess on any issues, questions, or concerns stemming from our response for her request for data and information on this particular item.
Yes, Committee Member Boggess, would you like to respond?
Yes, ma'am. Superintendent Jones, I really do appreciate this. This is not actually what I expected. I don't know what I expected, but a memo, wow, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I still have ongoing concerns about the misinformation and the advertising that goes on. This is dated August 23. Has that increased this month with the ongoing solicitation and misrepresentation?
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
So my understanding, Madam Chair, to Board Member Boggess's question is no. I'm not aware of any increase or increased concerns with the process. I mean, there was some interaction or relations with the particular entity that there were the concerns with, but at this point, it doesn't seem like there are any or increases, if you will, to her question. Director Todd Call is here as well from the Strategic Initiatives, or he is our Director of Strategic Initiatives. Madam Chair, it might be good to check in with him as well, as he's an integral part of the overall process related to the Utah Fits All Scholarship. So can we just check with him real quick on that question?
You bet. Todd?
You bet. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Todd Call, Director of Strategic Initiatives here for you at the Utah State Board of Education. And Deputy Jones' response is correct. There has not been an increase from the data collection that we gathered on August 23rd. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Does that answer or follow up appropriately on Board Member Boggess's request, Madam Chair?
Member Boggess?
Yes, ma'am. I just appreciate it. And I appreciate you guys addressing the misinformation. And I'm just really sad that this has occurred. But thank you for the work you do.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, unless there's anything else, just check with Cammie. I don't think there's anything else within this particular item 3.4 as follow-up for request for data and information. If we could pause though and see if any of the committee members have any requests, or if we've not followed up on any prior requests, staff would appreciate that, because we always want to make sure that we're supporting you and your request for data and information. So have we missed anything, or are there any additional requests for data and information at this time, Madam Chair?
Committee members, do any of you have any additional requests or questions that you would like staff to look into for you? I am not seeing any hands.
At your direction, ma'am, then that concludes item 3.4. And at your direction, we can move to 3.5.
Yes, let's move to 3.5.
Okay, Madam Chair, this one is an information item. It's the 2023 state basic rate. If you would recognize Director Sam Urey, he can provide the information. We felt this is an important update to you, the Finance Committee, related to the unfreezing of the basic rate and where we're at with it. So very, very good information. So if you could recognize him, Sam will provide you all that you need on this particular item.
Yes, thank you very much. Director Urey, we appreciate your time. We are becoming more and more acquainted with the complexities of finance, and this is such important information. So go ahead.
Well, great. Yes, Sam Urey, School Finance Director. I do want to recognize and appreciate Deputy Jones and his, his ability to recognize this opportunity, as we did have the basic rate set in June, and it really is the first time in 5 years that it hasn't been frozen, and we'll get into what that means and the implications. But if we can go to the first backup, this is from the Utah State Tax Commission, and it may not make a lot of sense yet, so we may go back to this, but there are some things that we'll point out here, and then we'll go through some more basic elements to it, and I think it will make sense when we get to the end. Please feel free to stop with questions at any point. And I want to ask MSP Administrator Del Frost to correct me if I begin spouting anything that's incorrect. But so we have very important to this discussion is a revenue target, and so that target is there at the top. So that's the amount that needs to be generated to by the basic property tax levies. All of the numbers under there, the local, real, centrally assessed personal property, those are property tax values. And we won't go into too many specifics there, but we now have in the system two separate elements that combine to make the basic rate. But basically what's been happening for 5 years after HB 293 is that the rate has not been floating down like it generally would, and so it's been able to maintain some of those property tax value increase gains for the system. Anyway, we're here at our total rate of 0.001406. And what does that mean? Why do we care? Let's get into that. So if we can go to the second backup, and I want to acknowledge and appreciate Ben Leishman from the Legislative Fiscal Analyst's Office. I'm not sure that there's another person in the state of Utah that knows more about school finance than Ben, but I asked Ben if he had some resources for me to not recreate the will, and he had this whole presentation for us. So we'll review it and not go quite as in depth, but feel free to ask questions. So if we can go to the second slide here. Perfect. So just a quick kind of overview and recap in the state's role in education is to kind of establish and maintain our educational system. And it's important to recognize that we need to provide a reasonably equitable educational opportunity for all students, regardless of district wealth. And so this is the primary mechanism, the basic rate, for ensuring that equitable educational opportunity. So the local role in this is that, so the local school district's role is to pay a reasonable portion of the minimum school program. And, obviously local boards can provide opportunities beyond that minimum school program through some of the more discretionary levies. We've talked a lot this year about the voted and board. There's also the capital local levies. So we do want to maintain that idea of the local control, but the basic rate establishes and ensures that each school district pays their portion of the basic tax levy, and then each school district is funded at least at that minimum level. So if we can go to the next slide here. So I love this graphic in the middle of this student, and I like to, I don't know, kind of think of things in more real terms. So if we think of this student as my 10-year-old, my fourth grader at Eastridge Elementary in the Ogden School District, he is funded by his weighted pupil unit for fiscal year 24 is $4,280. And we all know that there are add-ons to that, for at-risk add-on and special ed add-on and all those things. But the basic weighted pupil unit is funded by both income tax from the state and by local property tax. And so the mix of this fourth grade student will be different in each school district, but the basic rate is what provides that delivery of the basic education for the students in all of our school district. So it's important to recognize that the basic rate, as it was kind of set forth, relies on the statewide taxable property value. So all the taxable property value in the state. The legislature determines a revenue target, which was, if you'll recall, was at the top of that spreadsheet that the tax commission uses. So that revenue target is important. And then the tax commission does their math to set the rate to meet that revenue target. And so there's some important elements to that, in that without the basic rate freeze, as the property tax values increase, the rate naturally will go down. It will what we call float down, right? And so we want to make sure that you understand that element to it, and why it's been important that it's been frozen and now it's unfrozen, right? Thawed, I guess. But any questions to this point? We'll get more into it, and I want to kind of maintain that balance of a high level, but we can dive down deeper into any of the elements that we see here. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I love this graphic because it does an excellent job at illustrating how the basic rate functions in real terms. And so if you look, the red parts of the bars are the local property tax collections, and the green bars are the state revenue from income tax that are contributed. So obviously, we know Park City is a more wealthy school district. They are in what we call recapture because their basic tax levy collections over and exceed the cost to fund the basic school program for their students. If they were somehow to have an influx of students without a accompanying increase in property values, we could maybe get them out of there, but basically we coordinate with them and they send a check back, which is then distributed into the uniform school fund. But you can see here that whether or not a student is in Ogden, like my student, or a student is in Nebo or Tintic, in this slide is kind of on the less wealthy side, whether or not their property tax contributions make up a bigger percentage or not, they're all getting through the guarantee the complete basic school program funded. As you may know, charter schools obviously cannot levy taxes, and so all of their WPU funds come from state funds. Any questions to this point? Okay, if we'll go to the next. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. So some helpful, timeline and context here is, as we were in about 2015, 2016, that rate kept floating down as property tax values across the state rose. So there was some concern with, the declining portion of the local contribution to the basic school program, and some increased pressure for additional property tax equalization. And so back in 2015, SB 97 increased the basic rate to generate $75 million additional dollars. And then in 2018, HB 293, the bill was called Tax Rebalancing Revisions, established what we call the freeze on the equity pupil rate. Let's see if we can go to the next slide here. Okay. And so you'll kind of see with this graphic that as we had the freeze come into place, the basic rate was able to stay up there and capture some of that value from the increased property tax values statewide. So 23, that last year there, the basic rate revenue as a percent of basically HB 293, we were trending downward, right? Until in 2018, local basic rate revenue was only 14% of the total basic school program. And with HB 293, that went up until over 18%. So as now that has expired, we may see that percentage start to float back down. we may see further legislative action to mitigate some of those impacts, but that's the situation that we're in right now. So if we can go to the next slide. And just another way kind of looking at this, the actual basic rate is the red dots and the red line. And then the actual revenue generated in millions is those green bars. But you can kind of see there that once it was held, the revenue was able to increase quite a bit, along with those increasing property tax values. Okay, if we can go to the next slide here. So a couple of other things, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but HB 293 kind of broke out the basic rate and created what was called the equity pupil tax rate, which is kind of the main part of it. And that was what was frozen and has now expired. There's also the WPU value rate, which is revenue that's generated from increases to the WPU value. And that was kind of on top of the freeze. So just it also created some different restricted accounts within the education fund. And if you follow the history, some of the our schools now type things, compromises resulted in some of these changes. But so it is important to recognize that there are those two pieces now to the basic rate, the equity pupil tax rate and the WPU value rate. But again, now in fiscal 24, we have the rate that has floated down a little bit, and we're at that 0.001406. So if we can go to the next slide here.
Sam, I show August has a question.
Yes,
Thank you.
Go ahead, Member Bogus.
Thank you. Director Yuri, I have a message here from someone watching, and they would like the WPU value explained. And I suppose I could type it up, but I was wondering if you could address that, because you could probably do a better job than I could.
Okay, so basically the WPU value is the dollar amount for each weighted pupil unit. And I apologize if I kind of glossed over that definition. If we can go back to slide 3, that slide addresses the WPU value here on the left. So it's, the WPU, the weighted pupil unit, is that uniform factor that we use to determine the cost of the basic related and some of the related to basic programs. And it's the basis of how we distribute all of our state funds to our LEAs. We've addressed a little bit how each student generates a WPU. There are those add-on weightings, but basically the dollar amount, which is right now $4,280 for each of those WPU increments is set by the legislature each year. Obviously, we discussed that at board meeting yesterday, the increase to the WPU value, right? I don't know if that answers the question there. Are we?
I believe it does. I don't know exactly. My assertion is that the unit and the value are the same. Like, it's just dollars and cents. There's not a change in that.
Right.
Is that accurate?
Yes, if I'm understanding the question correctly, yes, that's completely accurate.
Yeah,
So.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you doing that. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So this ninth slide here just kind of illustrates another way of looking at, obviously the legislature doesn't collect the property taxes, the local school districts do. It just kind of illustrates what happens to get property tax into state restricted accounts when those sorts of things happen. So basically, if property taxes go up, a school district is generating more property taxes, then the state has to fund less of their weighted pupil units, and so then we have more available to free up for other purposes. So if we can go to the next one here, I actually, we've kind of discussed this quite a bit, but where last fiscal year, right, was the final year of the frozen equity pupil rate, and then this year the rate adjusted down to generate the revenue target because the statewide property tax values keep going up. So just I really don't want to get too into the weeds here. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this just illustrates kind of some of the revenue target, right? The frozen rate over those last 5 years, and let's see just some of the different scenarios that we could have seen if there was no WPU value rate in the target. And it looks like Del Frost has a comment for us. Thank you, Del.
Chair, may I add just one piece of information?
Yes, we would appreciate it.
Yeah, I think the important thing to know is that these two tax rates, the equity pupil tax rate funded growth in the voted and board program, and that is what's going away with the removal of the freeze. The WPU value rate will continue, and that's what's funding growth in the Teacher Student Success Account program, TSSA. So those are the two things I wanted you to know, that these increases funded the vast majority of the growth in those two programs. One is ending, but the legislature created a new funding mechanism to increase funding to voted and board. That's not related directly to the basic rate, but the WPU value rate, as the WPU value increases, that will continue, and that will fund TSSA funding. If that's helpful.
It was, thank you. Okay.
Great. Yes, thank you, Del. So our last slide here, if we can go to the last one, is a good summary of some of our learning objectives. I'm a former educator, so we'll make sure that we target some learning objectives here. But the basic rate really does rely on the statewide taxable value. It is the foundation of the fully equalized basic school program and the WPUs. The rate does not generate additional revenue automatically from increased value of property. So as statewide taxable value goes up, it does not automatically generate additional revenue. That rate floats down, right? And so that's the important distinction to realize, that when we had the 5-year freeze, like we've had the past 5 years, we were actually capturing some of that value change. Now with the freeze going away, we're not capturing because the rate is floating down. Does the rate factor shifts in taxable value among school districts? Yes, it does. So districts with higher increases in taxable value will pay more towards the revenue target as part of equalization. So there are definitely effects on individual school districts, but as a whole, because of the way it's set up, any increase in statewide taxable value is not going to generate additional revenue in the basic property tax levy. So that really concludes my overview. Happy to answer questions. Wanted to just give you this overview and help us understand collectively this important piece of our funding system. Dale, Deputy Jones, anything to add?
I'm not seeing any questions, but I do have a question on this last slide. Where you mentioned that districts with higher increases in taxable value pay more towards the revenue target. Is the opposite true, that those with larger revenue decreases pay less towards the revenue target? That's the way that.
Well, right. So if your taxable value were going down, then you would pay less, right?
And that ties to that graphic that's got the big tall Park City and. Yeah, okay. I'm just making sure that I'm connecting the pieces.
Yeah, the graphic on the slide here is for the 10 years between 2012 and 22, and kind of tracking some of the values there. So you can basically it's kind of reflecting growth, right? We know that Utah County and Washington County and Tooele, Weber have been growing, while some of the more rural counties maybe have been shrinking a little bit. And so it's just a reflection of that with taxable property values as well.
Okay.
So-
Member Davis.
Yeah, I just want for clarity, but those that have higher value rates are paying more in the system, even though the rate is floating down. They're staying pretty even, correct? And the reason they're paying more is because those who have lower values still have the low rate. Is that correct? It's not like, the people with increased property values are paying more and more and more personally, because as their property value increases, their rate decreases, legislatively designed so that they're not, contributing more and more and more, correct?
Right. I believe, and Dale may be better at explaining this than I do. He's got his hand up here.
Go ahead, Dale.
Thank you, Chair. I believe the question, Vice Chair Davis, this is a fact that, everybody's paying the same rate across the state. And so, but depending on the value, if your valuation in county is going up, you're generating more of the revenue statewide, but you're paying the same rate. Does that answer the question?
So proportionally, your district is paying more, but the rate is the same.
Right. So if you had a house worth $300,000 in one county versus the other, you'd be paying the same amount on the basic rate.
Can you help me understand how the rate is reducing if the rate stays the same? When the value goes up, the rate goes down, but you're saying the rate stays the same. Are we talking about two different rates?
No, the rate is the same statewide in the fiscal year. It changes with each fiscal year depending on, the legislature sets the revenue target, which is important, and
Got
then
it.
the
Sorry, I missed
statewide.
that little
Nope,
piece.
nope.
Got it. Thank you.
This is one that it takes some time to there's a lot of moving pieces. So
Yes.
don't
Yeah, it was a timing.
apologize.
Thank
Don't
you.
apologize. No, yeah. So important to the basic rate is the revenue target set by the legislature, and then the statewide taxable value. So
Great. Oh, we might have to listen to this more than once. We'll put you on repeat, Sam, so that more and more of this can come into us, kind of like we've been doing with Dale.
hopefully it doesn't put you
We're
to
getting
sleep,
it.
but
Thank you so very much. We appreciate that. All right, Deputy Superintendent Jones. I'm not seeing any more questions, so
Right.
are we ready to jump into the
to the big action item for finance committee today. So all action items are important. This one is the state fiscal year 2023 carry forward balance status and approval for use. What we're seeking here is a review by you and the finance committee members of the carry forward balances. Keep in mind, these are unrestricted state funds, carry forward balances. The reason why we do this is to ensure that you all see where we stand as far as year-end close goes and what the resulting carry forward balances are. Just to clarify something too as well, I got a question about, well, how does carry forward balances relate to the discretionary funds? So we just want to make sure that you know that these are the programmatic unrestricted state carry forward funds. So if the board approves them, they stay within the programs or within the sections. The discretionary fund account is separate in the sense that, and Deborah can correct me if I'm wrong, that is just specific to the board piece or portion of the overall budget and your carry forward dollars from those different sources of funding, state, federal mineral lease, things like that. But if you're approved, like say for the CTE carry forward plan, right, then that money, if approved by you, would stay within the CTE program and or section. So I just want to pause there and make sure that I'm clear on what the distinction is and why we separate this process from the discretionary funds process. Discretionary funds are board, your line item, your board carry forward funds that result in the build of the discretionary fund sheet that you see, that tracker, right? All of these are from the sections themselves. And if you recommend to the board and then the board approves it, those funds stay within the section and don't update the discretionary funds. They're mutually exclusive type processes in the sense that we, and that's why we do separate them out or make them distinct from each other. And I hope that makes sense. So I'd just like to pause there, Madam Chair, and see if there's any questions or concerns about the difference and why we do it this way, in the sense of having this agenda item specific to the sections and the programs within the sections, and then the discretionary fund sheet. So could we just pause there, ma'am?
We've got a question from committee member Bogus, and then I wanted to just make I just want to make a comment before we can start into our individual accounts. Committee member Bogus.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Superintendent Jones, for that clarification. I know they stay within the programs, or I understand that rather. My question is, can they become discretionary within the programs? Or, I've looked these over, or are they all reallocated, if you will, very specifically?
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
And we might need to recognize Assistant Superintendent Jacobson to help me answer this question. So if I understand the question, which was, can they become discretionary? I would say no to that, because as part of the process, what we're seeking is for you as the board to approve what has been brought to you by the respective directors of the particular sections, that is their ideas or recommendations for use of the resulting carry forward balances of unrestricted state funds. So if you approve their plan, then that becomes the use of those funds, or what the intended use of those funds are. So I think it reduces the discretionary side of things. It makes it more specific that you are approving what they recommended, what they proposed, right? So then those funds become channeled, if you will, or dedicated or committed or encumbered towards what they're recommending, as long as you, the board, approve it. So does that answer Board Member Bogus's question, Madam Chair?
Oh,
Let's ask, go ahead, Member Bogus. Does that answer your question?
it does, ma'am. Thank you. And I appreciate the time taken to clarify. Thank you.
Okay, And just to continue on with that, you will see in these spend plans how they have it pretty well lined out, and you'll see exactly what that plan will be. And because we have 11 of these spend plans, if it meets with your approval, Deputy Superintendent Jones, I'm thinking that what we should do is hear the director or the assistant superintendent or whoever's presenting it, and then have some time for questions after that particular one before we go on to the next one. But rather than interrupt their flow, would that be okay, do you think?
Sure. My recommendation is that we turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Jacobson, because it's a coordinated process to arrive where we are right now. So she and her budget managers get with the respective sections, and there are section representatives here. My recommendation, though, is to let Assistant Superintendent Jacobson lead out on each and every one. And then if there are questions, that's why we have the staff here to answer specific questions. Say if you get a question on the information technology spend plan, then if Deborah can't answer it, or Superintendent Jacobson cannot answer it, she can defer to Director Felt. That way it goes one by one through Superintendent Jacobson, and then, to your point, ma'am, as we go, if would that be acceptable as a process?
That is exactly why we have you in that seat, and it's all well choreographed, and take it away.
Okay. So if you would recognize Assistant Superintendent Jacobson, she can add any of the administrative side of things that I might have missed in explaining this process, and then proceed along the lines of each one of the plans: assessment, CTE, data and statistics, and then all the way through. If you'd recognize her, ma'am.
Yes. Assistant Superintendent Jacobson, welcome, and thank you so much for taking this time with us today. Before we get started, it looks like Committee Member Davis has a question or comment.
I just have a question for the chair. Do you want to get a motion on the floor now that's the recommended action, or because I've read all these plans, but do you want to wait to the end and do the recommended, or would you like to move these individually since they're going to be addressed individually at the end of each discussion, each item?
Well, that's just a great question. And we have a recommended motion that we are going to bring them as one. I think that Deputy Superintendent Jones, do we need to? Nope, we don't. Never mind. Yeah, so we have one recommended motion, and if you would like to put that motion on the board.
Okay, I think I will. And then if members need to amend something, we'll at least have some forward momentum as we're listening to our.
I think that would be wonderful.
Okay. I move that the Finance Committee recommends that the board approve the spend plans for the unencumbered state fiscal year 2023 carry forward balances. And I'll speak to the motion that I have read the plans, but I am interested in hearing what has to be said by the staff and the other board members, and would consider amendments as we continue to discuss through this next section prior to voting.
Thank you very much, Member Davis. Member Bogus.
Sorry, I tried to get before the motion. I'd like to divide out student support services. So I would to divide that out.
Okay, we're not going to vote yet. We're going to take this time to take this information. And so that would be appropriate at the end. Okay, let's go with Deputy Superintendent. Sorry, let's go Assistant Super. Let's go Deborah.
Good morning. This is an exciting time for us for Financial Operations, just because it means we've officially closed for the year. And now we can focus on FY24 and moving into FY25. So as far as these spend plans, just to give you an overview of what this is, we've closed out our year, officially closed out the year. Our budget managers and section accountants have now gone through, they've identified any carry forward that is restricted, that can only be used for one purpose. Anything that is a multi-year project, such as USIMS. And we've pulled those out. So what you're actually seeing is only the unrestricted money that can be utilized, that gives a little bit of latitude for sections to use in these particular programs. Also, they've identified any carry forward that is $100,000 or more. We kind of restrict it to that. So with that, just as a high level note, we actually closed out the year this year with $460 million in non-lapsing balances. The majority of that is restricted. So a little over 300 million of that is restricted, which the most of that is MSP related programs. And so what you're left with now is about $82 million. That's what the 11 that we have today actually account for. The section accountants and budget managers then go through and they figure out what is encumbered by a grant or some kind of a procurement process. So that left about 51 million out of these plans, $51 million that were completely unrestricted. The plans that you actually see today include $42 million, well, actually closer to $43 million in actual plans. The staff have identified about 8.5 million that could potentially be reallocated. They can't find reasonable or allowable costs to spend those on. So they are actually suggesting that it be reallocated in some way, which could take board action and may require legislative action depending on what the funding is suggested to be used for. So I'll stop there to see if there's any questions from there.
I'm not saying anything.
Okay. And then I can just open it up to questions for specific spend plans if there are any questions there.
So you want us to, if we have a question about a specific spend plan that we've read to get more detailed, this would be the time to ask that question?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question then on assessment.
Madam,
Okay.
okay, right. So Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Yeah, if we could go sequentially, that would be great. And you are, I mean, you started with assessment. So if we could just see if there's questions on assessment and then go to CTE and then down the line, that would be very helpful to us to capture those questions, to put them in the minutes, as it will be a value add to board members who review this ahead of the action item, next month. So if we could go sequentially, that would be great. And that's fine. You started with assessment. So thank you, ma'am.
Okay. I was noticing in assessment that there is some of that carry forward is set aside for assisting our classroom teachers with the huge job they have of hand scoring each of those Acadience math tests, and I thought that was wonderful. I am concerned throughout this document when I read about additional assessment. Now, it appears to me that additional assessment is in the development. It may be that these questions are going to be taking oath questions out. Ooh, it would be really nice if they were going to consolidate and so that we maybe had fewer questions. But I would just like to know if I am, in some type of a trauma mode that we might be getting more assessment questions, or are we just developing better questions or consolidating questions? So that's my question for assessment. Is it going to lead to more assessment?
Do you see? I think Assistant Superintendent Darren Nilsson would be the most appropriate to answer that question, but I'm not seeing him online.
He may be in another committee, and we can hold that till we see him come on, and that's okay, and I can step back.
Yeah, I believe he would be the most appropriate to answer that question.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on assessment? Okay. How about CTE?
Looks like Member Bogus has a question on CTE. Or maybe not on CTE.
Oh,
That
I
was-
do have one on CTE. I was trying to be patient, ma'am. I apologize.
Yeah, who's ever driving, can you open up the CTE spend plan, please? Thank you.
Superintendent Jacobson, I'm wondering, I believe it is on page 2. It at the top, it says spend plan detail, additional Adobe services. And yes, that's it. Okay. So I'm wondering, as I recall the policy requests and all the funding requests, there's a huge request in our money request for the legislature for Adobe. How do we juxtapose that with this? Maybe that's just the first question.
So this funding in particular is the funding that we received from the legislature for that purpose.
So would it be a correct, may I follow up?
Yes.
So would it be a correct understanding that we have carry forward money and we're going to ask for more money?
No, this is requesting to expand the use for this funding for Adobe.
So I understand that, but I think, and maybe someone can correct me if I recall incorrectly, isn't there like a $4 million request on the other side from yesterday in the green and yellow worksheet? It's $2 million. So we have carryover money, and we're going to ask for another 2 million, even though we have
Because
carryover money.
we would have spent almost all of that $2 million this year in programs, and we're going to need that much more if we want to have those same Adobe programs for next year. This is just a little portion that was left over.
Okay, so then my question would be, and it's just a question, is it an option to decrease that request and instead of expanding, using this money to fill in that gap? And it's just a question.
Madam Chair, I can address that question.
Would you please?
So here's what we're dealing with here. This is a good question because it allows the opportunity for me to state this for all of these programs. Resulting carry forward balances become what we define as one-time money, right? So to Chair Norton's point, we received a certain amount from the legislature for use for Adobe. We do have a carry forward balance. So then we quote unquote execute, or if you approve the use of these funds as intended here, as described here, we would burn through those. Please recall that the request that you see, Board Member Bogus is absolutely right. She's tracking very well. She sees that request for Adobe, but that is for money for fiscal year 25. So see, we're in fiscal year 24. So we burn these balances up, right? If you approve the spend plan, then if the legislature funds that, that becomes money that's effective in FY25. So hopefully I'm helping answer the question, because we always want to try to execute our non-lapsing carry forward balances from prior fiscal years But then we also want to continue, and if we do need increases to funding in the what we call, from a financial bean counter definition, the out years. So see, fiscal year 25 is an out year now. So we'd want to, make that request if the board directs us to make that request. I'm not sure if it's green or yellow on the tracker right now, but that's what I'm trying to explain is, right now we are where we are. We have this carry forward balance. If you approve it, if the board approves it, we burn it up or execute it during the remainder of FY24. But the request that board member Bogus is seeing and talking to is for 25 and on. And then, yes, at the end of 25, if the legislature funds it, we might have carry forward balances, but that's the process and the system works pretty well. So, sorry, Chair Norton, did I answer board member Bogus's question or did I confuse the whole group? Over.
Did that help, member Bogus?
Actually, very much so. Just the reminder that the ask is in a different fiscal was very much so good for me. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
And if you'll notice in this particular plan, it says that money, they kind of have that money in there just as a little bit of a protection because it's a true up clause so that, they don't want to get to May and be short. They would rather have just a little bit of money just in case. So it kind of trues them up to get them clear to the end of the fiscal year. And
thank you, ma'am. I do appreciate that because that would, just the whole fiscal thing, I think was my holdup there. And I didn't fully process that to its logical end. Thank you.
Thanks. Member Davis.
I just wanted to add a little note about Adobe, for the public that's listening, is that I highly dislike vendor bills. The reason I'm okay with the Adobe situation is because it's a sole source. And this is a sole source that our students are using across the whole state, and they need access to the product. And if everyone's going to be paying for it, we should, with an economy of scale, get the discounts that will allow us a statewide contract. So for those out there going, why are we supporting one vendor over another or whatever, just know that the products that the students are using are sole source, and we can save taxpayer dollars by doing it this way. I just want to throw that out.
Thank you. Great comment. All right, back to you, Deborah.
The one thing that I would like to note on this is that this funding in general was one-time funding to begin with. So if we want it to move forward, there would need to be a legislative ask for it. So if that kind of helps clarify as well.
And if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes.
So specifically related to the request for FY25, currently on the board's tracker, it still shows yellow. It wasn't moved to green. So the Adobe request wasn't moved to green. My understanding is every legislative session there has been a request to revert the Adobe funding to ongoing funding, but it's the legislature that's decided to keep it as one-time funding. Is that correct, Assistant Superintendent? Yeah, she's shaking her head north and south. So I just want to make sure for the good of the group that everyone knows that the status still is yellow for the request, on the proposal process that we're taking with the full board. So hopefully that helps too.
Thank you. Member Davis.
I kind of intend to move to support it later next month, but I didn't include it in the prioritized for this coming week to be prioritized. Truthfully, because Senator Fillmore was their advocate last time in the legislative committee meeting, and he's in charge of PEA. And so I feel like they've already got a strong advocate, and some of these other things that we have needs for may not have advocates out there. But I think that's a great reminder. Thanks for letting us know. And we probably should seriously consider moving that into a green column, even if we don't put it in our top 12. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's needed in the schools for sure. Yeah. Okay, that's the only other hand I saw, Deborah.
Are there any, if there's no further questions for CTE, we can move on to data and statistics. If there's any questions there.
Board member Davis has her hand still raised or no? Okay, thanks, ma'am. Madam Chair, at your direction, we can move to the next plan.
Go ahead. Yep.
Go ahead, Deborah.
So
ICP.
these are, so I do need to clarify here, when we talk about sections, these are how we roll up for reporting purposes. The reason that these 3 particular programs are in the ICP is only for the sole purpose that they are either supervised by the superintendent or the chief of staff directly. These are actual state funds and they are not part of the actual ICP pool, the indirect cost pool. So if there's any questions here.
No,
Sorry,
doesn't
it
look
takes
like
me
it.
so long. I try hard.
Oh, go ahead, Member Vargas.
Thank you. If we scroll down to the next page, it says spend plan detail and you lead. Am I on the correct?
Oh, go down a little more, Cami. One more.
Oh, okay. It says contract extensions have been provided. What are those contract extensions for?
Do we have director, is Megan on? I think Megan's here. She would be best to answer that question.
There she is. Go ahead, Megan.
Hi, thank you, Director Everett. Megan, whatever. So those are from previous no-cost extensions. So they were contracts that were awarded for research projects previously, and then no cost extensions were provided to them. The reason they didn't appear in the encumbered funds already was because the contracts themselves were sent to the university, but they haven't signed them on their end to send them back. So they kind of, I mean, to my mind, should be sitting in that encumbered funds piece and just aren't, just because of where we were in the process.
I have a small follow-up, if that's okay.
Of course, go ahead.
So I could be misunderstanding Director Everett, but is this the cart before the horse? Or maybe that's the question.
I guess I'm not sure I understand. So the way that these happened is that contracts were awarded to different groups, different universities for research that they were doing with an agreement that they would provide their findings to ULEAD. With COVID and different things, some of those were awarded or asked for no cost extension. So the funds that they had already agreed to, they could still access. They were just taking longer to finish their research than they had anticipated. We agreed to that and created the extension paperwork and sent it to the university. They just haven't signed it and sent it back yet. And so because we were in the middle of that, it looks like those contracts have ended. And we're waiting on their signatures to come back. So they're basically agreements that were already in place. They just aren't showing in the encumbered funds in the way you might expect.
Okay, thank you. I might reach out to you offline, Director Everett. Thank you for your time.
Okay, great.
One more follow-up question, Director Everett. How much of this $534 is it just the 43,000 that's that's in limbo? What's the amount that's the in limbo portion?
It is the 43,000, correct? So all that's requested here is the 43,443 to cover those agreements. And then we brought on a new staff member that we need to get some additional software licensing for. Like, we're out of Tableau licenses through our data and statistics department. So we'll have to cover the cost of an additional one of those. So that's the only amount requested.
Okay. Okay. I don't see any other questions.
Your direction, ma'am, can we move to the next program, please?
Yes.
Which would be, yeah. Go ahead, Deborah.
And on IT, I mean, obviously their biggest carry forward would be USIMS. So it is not included in here because it's a restricted multi-year project. But if there are any questions on any of these other programs, we've got Director Felt online.
And I'm not seeing any other questions.
Your direction, ma'am, next program, please. This is internal audit, ma'am, for review by you and the committee.
One thing to note here is internal audit is always fantastic to be very detailed on what they intend on spending their funds on. At the end of the day, anything that they request to be reallocated will go back to the board discretionary fund. So in this case, they are advising that they cannot utilize about $68,000 that will end up back in the board discretionary. So if there's no questions here.
I do see a question from Member Bogus.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Superintendent Jacobson, on this one, it says in the bottom right, there's $40,000 for personnel. But in the upper part, the spend plan detail, it doesn't articulate that I'm seeing.
Correct. So when you look at the detail, those are kind of overall projects that they want to work on.
Mm-hmm.
So like the workshop, you'll see the 45,560 is incentive awards. That actually includes the personnel piece, but also the indirect cost that expenses that are associated with those.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that.
Does that? Okay.
Hey, I'm not seeing any other questions.
Your direction, ma'am, we'll move to the next section,
Great, thank you.
which is policy and communications. Any additional information here, Deborah?
I don't have any additional information here. This one's pretty straightforward.
Subject to questions and concerns, Madam Chair.
Yes, I think we can move on. I don't see any.
Okay, next program. Special education, ma'am. Now, this one, special education is large. It's obviously it's a large program. So even if there's no questions or concerns, if we could just take, slow, smooth as fast, if we could just take some additional time here for committee members to review this spend plan. Here too, I would echo what Deborah or Assistant Superintendent Jacobson said about internal audit. Here too, all of the sections do a good job. The details, though, are quite extensive here as well. So thank you. Subject to any questions or concerns, ma'am?
Again, I'm not seeing any questions or concerns.
Your direction will move to the next program.
Thank you.
Let's see. so here's the state charter school board administrative funds or recommended spend plan. We coordinated with, I believe it was Marie. As everyone knows, Jennifer Lambert recently left the position and they're seeking an executive director at this point, is my understanding. They're in the recruiting process for that. So any questions or concerns or subject to questions and concerns on the SCSB administrative proposed spend plan, Madam Chair?
Looks like Deborah has a comment and then I have a question. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to note on this particular spend plan, because of the timing of the state charter school boards meetings, as well as your own meetings, your board meeting, this is pending the state charter school board. They have not, I'm sure they've seen it by now, but they won't finalize it until their next board meeting. So this will come back with a full plan in the October meeting.
That was my very question. So great. Thanks for clarifying that.
Your direction will move to the next.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Student support services for review. Deborah, anything on this one?
No, there's no additional. I know this one's a big one. And we do have Assistant Superintendent Voorhees, I believe, is online to answer any direct questions for these programs.
Great. And there we go. Board Member Bogus has some questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Superintendent Voorhees.
Yeah.
Good. We are just together all the time these days. I have some consternation about the home visit training. Not only is it I know we're dealing with billions, but $50,000 in home visit training. I'm wondering if you could articulate what that means, so that I make sure what's in my head is what is in your head.
Chair, could Director Van Deventer respond? That is one of her programs.
Thank you. Yes. Go ahead, Director Van Deventer.
Thank you. Tracy Van Deventer, Director of the Center for Continuous School Improvement. There was a $3 million grant that was set aside so that schools across the state could participate in the home visit training and also then completing home visits in their districts. And we have a number of those districts that have taken advantage of that. But some of those schools were not able to begin because of conflicts, and the training was set up in the summer and schools and teachers had different plans. And so they expressed an interest to us to continue with providing some of those trainings. And this would allow us to provide some additional trainings. That's exactly the training that we have already been providing, connected to the home visit program that's been set up. But this would allow us to have 10 more trainings to what's offered already this year, and would allow us to get more teachers trained. An additional challenge that we noticed was that some people were hired to be part of their school after those trainings were offered. And we wanted to give those new employees an opportunity to also receive this training this upcoming year. So it is part of that parent-teacher home visit framework that's already been in place. We're using the same organization and the same approved support there. We just recognize that there has been a request that we provide more training so that more educators could participate.
Small follow-up, Chair.
Of course, thanks.
So I guess I don't exactly understand what we're being trained on. Is it personal safety? Because to me, visiting someone's home, I don't know what kind of training that actually requires. And so maybe help me understand that if you could, please.
Yes, so it sounds like you want more specifics. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes. I just don't understand what we're training in, because, and maybe on my mind is simplistic, Chair, but I'm thinking, we're aware of personal safety. We knock on the door. We have conversations with families. I'm just not certain what the training would be in that would necessitate a whole program. And
If I may, Chair?
Director Van Deventer, thank you. Yes, please.
Excellent question. Thank you so much. What we have recognized that in this training, it's built some consistency across the state, but also we have wanted to remind our educators that this is intended to be for all students, so that all students can participate and have their educator, their teacher come and be part of their community. At times in the past, sometimes just those kids that had behavior problems or just those kids that had attendance problems were singled out to receive that training. And that was one piece we wanted to become really clear about, is that this is really intended to build connection with the home. Also, there's a framework of questions that is part of this training that really helps both the teachers that are visiting and the parents talk around questions like, what dreams, what hopes and dreams do you have for your child? And how can I help? And how can the school support you? And making it a very positive, very, hopeful and focused on what can we as a whole community, both the home and the school, do and work together to support the success for that child. And then really, we want to connect the expertise of the family on their child with the classroom expertise of the teacher so that they're not just unplanned drop-ins, but that they're scheduled appointments. There's also a little training that talks about making sure that if they're not comfortable, that we give them other options like meeting in a public place if they want to meet at the park or some other place instead. And then also just re-clarifying that this is intended to be for those colleagues who are willing participants, that not every educator has to be part of this, but that those who choose to, it gives them some guidelines and some framework on how to make sure that that's a positive experience for everybody involved.
thank you for that. Ms. Van Deventer, I may connect with you offline too. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Very good.
Okay. Dr. Voorhees? Anything else you need to add?
No, happy to answer other questions, but yeah, we're grateful for the opportunity to bring the plan forward.
Okay, it looks like Board Member Straight has a question.
More of a statement.
Okay.
This seems so similar to the family engagement that we just passed for the money the other day. In fact, I think home visits is actually one of the things that they do with that. So anyway, seems like we're often duplicating the same types of things, but that's probably fine.
Thank you. All right, Assistant Superintendent Jacobson, I'm not seeing any other questions or comments.
Madam Chair, Scott.
Yes, sir.
Assistant Superintendent Nielsen is in the room now. At your direction, may we return to the assessment for that question that we tabled until he was here, and could they repeat the question, please, ma'am?
Yes, that was my question. So, Assistant Superintendent Nielsen, I am so grateful to see that very first item there with the help for the Acadience math. I come early and leave late, but boy, when they're testing Acadience math, I see a lot of people joining me early and late. And so I appreciate that, but that could be a big help. I was concerned on the word additional in other portions of this spend plan. And I'm a little nervous that we might be asking for additional testing. It appears, however, it was just to develop new questions that could maybe replace, not add to our current questions, or maybe even would be questions that could help us consolidate so that we end up with fewer questions on RISE. Can you address any of my concerns with that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to attempt to, and I appreciate the opportunity to address that topic. You're correct with your assumption that this spend plan does not include any type of request related to expanded testing opportunities or requirements for our students across the state of Utah. The additional ELA and RISE science item development is to enhance the item banks that we have. The science, though, specifically is to allow us to continue to move forward with the board's direction for us to provide access for our students who are in remote educational settings or virtual settings. Most of those are charter schools, but some of our LEAs have opportunities where students engage through their LEA in a completely virtual setting. You may be aware, if you recall from a brief discussion we had some time ago, we've moved forward with being able to provide RISE summative, RISE and Utah Aspire Plus, this coming assessment cycle, summative assessments, access to a remote delivery for students who are attending remote settings. Our science items or science tests are not available this year, and that's primarily limited because of the number of items that we have access to. I'm proud to be part of Utah, where we have developed custom-built assessments since 2014, particularly for grades 3 through 8. It used to be all the way through 3 through 11, but that involves us writing our own items, which is an expensive endeavor. Not all states do that, and that's why some states actually lease items from, have leased items from Utah's item bank in years previously, and the state board generates some revenue because of that. So I bring that up so you'll know that this is an investment that could have some returns for the State Board of Education, Utah's taxpayers, through those leasing agreements that sometimes in the past have been present. We currently have, the board currently has some leasing agreements with other states. Science, we participate in a group of states that share items. As the board adopted new science standards, I think it was about 3 years ago, that required us to, again, try to build up our item bank. And we joined with some other states under the direction of the board into an item sharing agreement. And so some of the items that we have in our science, grades 3 through 10, come from this agreement with other states who are also writing their own items. Any items that we have that align with the Utah course science standards that these other states provide have saved the State Board of Education money previously. It's been a great cost savings. However, some of those states limit, they have prohibitions on using their items in a remote proctoring setting. They have concerns about breaches of security or other things. And so this year, while ELA and math assessments for RISE and Utah Aspire Plus will be available for our students in online charter schools, the science will not be available at this point. And this item you're looking at right here is a big piece for us to be able to advance that quicker and get to a point where we can provide those assessments in that way as well. In addition, we don't have as many benchmark assessments. Remembering that benchmark assessments are also sometimes called testlets. They're very short items that are aligned to specific course standards. They're not required by the State Board of Education, but they're provided as a teacher resource. This last year, we had over 1 million of those benchmark assessments administered in the state of Utah. So their use is increasing from year to year. Teachers are finding valuable, and they're designed to help teachers with their day-to-day instruction and decisions that they make for students regularly. Because the science items that we have are much newer than what we have for ELA and or the standards, much newer than ELA and math, we're behind. And I don't want to say behind schedule, but we don't have as many items developed under the construct of our regular contract with this vendor. So these funds will be used to help build out those benchmark assessments as well in the area of science. Does that answer your question?
It does, and we are so fortunate to have you, and I am so grateful that we have, these Utah questions in there. And as I have used those benchmarks frequently, I am very grateful for them and the information that they give my students back. And I'm really happy to hear that we're not expanding additional testing. So yes, you did, and you put a smile on my face at the same time. Thanks. And I'm not seeing any other questions on assessment.
Okay, Madam Chair, at your direction, we can go back to where we left off, which would be teaching and learning.
Great, thank you.
Subject to review and any questions or concerns, Madam Chair.
I am not seeing any questions or concerns on the teaching and learning.
Okay, ma'am, I think that, is that the last one?
Oh, it
Cameron?
looks like Member Bogus might have a question or
okay.
concern.
I do not have a question on this one. I was just raising my hand because I would like to pull one of these before we vote on the motion.
Okay, this would be, let me just double, yeah. Assistant Superintendent, sorry, Deputy Superintendent Jones just said that this would be the time. So let's go ahead and have you proceed with that, Member Bogus.
I would like to pull student support services and the omnibus. I don't like omnibus motions, but I would like to pull student support services. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So do we have someone that would like to make a motion for the remaining items? And we could go ahead with those remaining items, and then we'll come back to student support services. Or does the motion that's on the table cover that?
I believe the motion covers it.
Okay.
But I would like to move to divide that out. I just don't know how that goes, Chair. Do we need to vote on dividing it out?
So we will first go through, let's go ahead and divide that out, and then we'll go back and vote on the remaining 10 items, and then we can go to the student services. All right. So members of the committee, we have a request before us to divide out item number 2, the spend plan for, sorry, it's not item number 2. We have the request to divide out the student services spend plan. All in favor of dividing that motion? Go ahead and please vote. I'm not seeing. I'm not seeing Chair Moss. Has he left the room?
Yes, ma'am. It looks like he's no longer in the room.
Okay, so that looks like that is unanimous for those 4 that are in the room with Chair Moss absent. All right, so now let's go back to the motion that was on the table. The Finance Committee recommends that the board approve the remaining spend plans for the unencumbered state fiscal year 2023 carry forward balances. Chris, yeah, thanks. All right, so go ahead and please vote. So again, this is for all the other ones except for student services.
Just point of information, are we going to then vote on student services?
Yes.
Still, okay.
Okay. So this one is unanimous as well, with a vote of 4-0, and Chair Moss is absent. Okay, so now we only have student services left. Member Bogus, would you like to speak to this particular spend plan?
Yes, ma'am. I have a question for Superintendent Jones, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
Deputy Jones, I'm wondering if we suspend this until the next Finance Committee, does that put huge wrenches in the timeline that must be met according to the code?
Subject to input from Student Support Services or Dr. Voorhees, I don't believe it does. You may want to consider, though, is there a particular component or, program, if you will, within the recommendation that you would like to hold off on? Or is it the overall spend plan that do it? But subject to Dr. Voorhees saying, I think it could wait another month, but I'd also just, recommend too, that you consider if there's a question or concern about one piece or part of the spend plan, you could let the other pieces go forward and we could follow up on that piece too. I hope that makes sense. Madam Chair, did I answer Board Member Bogus's question or address her concern?
Board Member Bogus, does that answer your question or your concern?
It does. I have one follow-up for Superintendent Jones.
Yes, ma'am.
So Superintendent Jones, if I moved this and suspended 3 line items until next month, that would be the preferred action. So we can let it move forward minus a couple line items.
Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
The answer is yes on the 3 items. And if it would be okay with Board Member Bogus to tell us what additional information or follow-up is needed on the 3 particular items so that we could work on those between now and the next meetings, to get that specificity would help us as staff follow up on those 3 items. But that would be my recommendation. And Madam Chair, can we check in with Dr. Voorhees on this to make sure I'm not committing something or saying something that she's not supportive of either, or?
Yes.
I hope she understands.
Thank you, Chair. Leah Voorhees, Assistant Superintendent of Student Support. So all of these items obviously could wait a month, but that means that then they would come up to committee next month. They would go to the board the following month, which means there would only be 7 months of the year left in which to get contracts in place, get interagency agreements in place, move funding for personnel, all of the, it just delays the process. So we would certainly prefer if there were specific items that you had concerns about approving, that they were removed for further consideration and that the rest of the items could move forward, so that as soon as the full board reviews them in October, if they're approved, we can move forward with implementing the spend plans. But that's obviously subject to the board's preference.
Thank you. Did that answer your question or concern?
Yes, ma'am. And I would have a motion for the committee.
Okay. Member Davis has her hand up. Member Davis?
I'm going to speak to the motion after it's made.
Okay, that would be fine. Thank you. All right, Member Bogus, let's have the motion then.
So I would move that we recommend to the board. Well, first of all, I don't know. Tell me if I word this right. I would move that we recommend to the board approval of the spend plan and return family home visit training, bullying prevention, behavior support, professional learning, and kindness walls back to committee in the next cycle, pending more information from Superintendent Voorhees and her staff.
Okay, let's see if Cammie is able to capture that.
I'm gonna need her to repeat a couple of those, sorry.
Okay.
So that the committee approve the students. Less, well, or I don't know how to articulate it, Ms. Wilcox, and return family home visit training, bullying prevention, and kindness walls back to committee pending further information. And then I can get with staff for full clarity on those. And I don't think that fully articulates it, but that is exactly what I said. That the committee approved this. How about less, maybe spending plan, less those 3 things and return those 3 things? I don't know if I verbalize that in a way that helps you write the motion.
I know you said kindness something, but I didn't capture what the second word was.
I believe in the original document, it says kindness walls. someone is welcome to correct me if I have that verbiage incorrect.
Okay, read that through, Member Bogus, and see if that looks like what you wanted. And then again, like you said, if other, if
I believe that, I apologize. I thought you were finished.
no, that's fine. Yes. Just
I believe that captures it well, and I will reach out again just to very clearly understand what I believe it's Director Van de Veter and Superintendent Voorhees, and ask these questions and get those remaining items.
do you want to speak to your motion?
I think, it might seem like it's not a lot of money, but to me, every dollar is important. And I really want to have greater clarity on home visit training, like what we're training people to do. And then I honestly don't fully understand the purpose or whether or not there's even evidence that kindness walls have an ROI. And then the bullying prevention piece, I did not ask that question in this meeting, but I would just love to see if there's a better way to do that before we push that forward in approving the spending. I just think there's a possibility that we could execute that better, and I would like to explore that.
Hey, Member Davis.
Yeah, I'm personally comfortable moving forward at this time. I just talked to another board member, honestly, yesterday, and I won't say who, but has a loved one who's being bullied in school. And it was a heartbreaking story. And I think this is important to address, but I also understand the desire to want to get more details. I really appreciated the detail we got on the home visits, but there is time, even if we move this whole rule forward, there is time prior to full board. Then a variety of board members anyone can bring amendments forward during full board and see if others want to take those out as well. So I'll probably vote to move these things forward today. And I just wanted to quickly clarify, when I do not like omnibus bills, I do not like omnibus rules. But Member Bogus had made a comment about omnibus motions. I'm fine with those because they increase efficiency in the meeting if the information for each of those is delineated separately in backup, which I think in this case is. And we have only combining motions, calling question, postpone or table the topic, or adjourn. That's the only tools we have at our disposal to increase efficiency in our meetings. And so sometimes that's why I think when people hear the word omnibus, I hate omnibus bills. I feel like things are getting hidden in there. So I just want to clarify that for the public in case people are listening, why you would make a combined motion. Thanks.
Hey.
We all have different preferences, and I completely respect Member Bogus's preference too. I just want to make sure people know why I'm okay voting for this.
All right. Board Member Straight.
Yes, thank you. I did a little quick research, and I kind of regret now talking about duplication in this regard, because I do know from that there is evidence of the effectiveness of home visits. Kindness walls, I mean, it's a part of a program. I'm not sure that if it's effectiveness or not, but if I move this forward today, then we get to hear it in a full board, and I'm fine with that. I'm gonna support moving it forward.
All right. Member Bogus, did you have another comment you needed to make?
No, just if the motion does not pass, then I would move to amend the main motion. Just for clarity.
All right. So the motion before the committee is that the committee approve the student support service spend plan less family home visit training, bullying prevention, and kindness walls, and return family home visit training, bullying prevention, and kindness walls back to the committee pending further information. Go ahead and please vote. Okay. It looks like that motion fails with members Straight, Davis, and Norton voting against it, and member Bogus in favor. Member Bogus, you have another.
Yes, ma'am. I would just move to send the spend plan to the full board for approval with at least 30 minutes allocated for amendments and discussion.
I don't know that we get to allocate time. I think that is a job of that is under the purview of leadership. Anybody have a comment on that? Member Davis, you've been there.
Yeah, no, we typically don't do that, but I don't think it would hurt for member Bogus to email leadership and say, look, this one might take a little more time because I want to have
flush out
some serious, and then it would be up to those three and the committee chair people. So member Hymas, Chair Hymas, Chair Norton, and Chair Booth.
Okay.
So just for clarity, I apologize.
Sorry. Sorry, go ahead, Christina.
Okay.
I apologize. Sometimes, folks, I just don't see what's happening. It doesn't come through quickly enough. Just for clarity, I get really frustrated in board meetings when there is discussion that is, for lack of a better word, promised that it can happen, and then it's shut down. And so if we're not going to send this back to committee because we've been told in main board meeting before, this is not the appropriate space to do this, this needs to happen in committee. So if as a committee, we're not going to take care of business that's supposed to be done in committee, and if we're going to send that business to the full board, then I want to ensure that this committee supports the fact that those discussions and amendments can happen before the full board, and that we will advocate for those discussions and amendments to happen before the full board. Otherwise, we're going to end up in the chaos of, do we send this to committee? Do we this? Do we that? I think we just need to be very cognizant of that and advocate for that as a group, or we need to do the work in committee like we have been told to do.
I think we've been doing the work in committee. I think we've fleshed this out, but board member Bogus, you have my commitment that when this comes up, or if this comes up in my leadership meeting, I will specifically say that we are going to need extra time on this to discuss it, and that I give my full support to that motion, that we give that time, and would highly recommend that we do so that we can get the best budget, planning for our committee and for our board. Would that satisfy your request?
Yes, ma'am. And I think in the main board meeting, we need that advocacy as well.
Okay.
Because we, as a committee, we have been chastised, I believe now 3 times. And so my motion is to honor that request that we do the work in committee. But if we're going to do the work before the full board, that's fine with me. I just want to make certain the work gets done.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it.
I mean, we are not limited on time here, but I think we had the motion. The motion did not pass, so I think we've given it our full time. But again, it will come before the board, so we will let them know that we've discussed it and this is where it sits, and now it's in the board's hands with time to discuss.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, So at this point, we are going to need a motion to take item, we have turned this down, so I would assume that we need a motion to take item 2 to the board. Anybody give me some help on that? Or because we divided it out.
Yes, I believe we do, Chair.
Okay. And could we have an updated recommended motion for this that we recommend that the board, no, we could just call the full one. Yeah, there we go. We have somebody that wants to make this, or I'll just go ahead and make it, that the committee approve the student support spend plan to forward to the full board. Forward.
Can I just add a quick note, Chair Norton? You
Thanks.
know, if we do it this way, instead of going back and just doing the first motion, including everything, Member Bogus, that will ensure that this actually gets listed separate than the full motion with everything else. So it would, you know, sort of carve out a little space for a whole separate conversation just on this, as opposed to all the other ones, unless another one of the board member wants to pull out another one.
Okay.
The response.
The committee approves the student support services spend plan to forward to the full board. Any
Ma'am?
discussion?
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Will you consider please adding to the full board for approval?
For approval.
Right, then to board member Davis's point, right, that facilitates that conversation of, well, in order to approve this, we still need to discuss, and then it segues into board member Bogus's, point, and then
Okay.
you and I can both make sure there's enough time.
Okay.
I hope that makes sense. Thank you,
Yeah,
man.
that makes more sense as to why we have it separate. So thank you. All right, board members, go ahead and please vote. Okay, that, I'm not seeing one from you, Vice Chair Davis. There we go. All right, that is unanimous with Chair Moss absent. Okay. Thank you very much, group. Our next item is item 3.7, which is also an action item. It's our, no, wait, just 1 minute. We are back. Board member Bogus has asked us to return to item number 4.
Thank you, ma'am. I would like to make a motion, and I could text it to whomever. Or maybe it's not a motion. Superintendent Jones can tell me. I would just love to see an update on the data research project that went through BYU last year. And I think this would be the appropriate time to ask for that information.
Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, staff doesn't need a motion. We consider that a request by a board member, so I can definitely provide that next month. That you're
Thank you.
directing to board member Boggs and the committee.
Thank you. If that's acceptable to the chair, then that is all I need. Thank you, ma'am.
That's great. Is that part of you, Reed?
I don't believe so, but
Oh, man. Oh, sorry.
Superintendent Jones.
So what board member Boggs is referring to, and it is on the discretionary funds report, is a research project that the board approved using discretionary funds for BYU to do research on apps, that students use to ensure that the company or entity that provides those apps for use by students or schools or teachers are following the laws as far as privacy and along that line. So yes, I definitely can give an update on that because we're meeting with BYU here in the near term and before the next meeting. So I've got
Awesome. Great, thank you. All right. So that has been added onto the request for information, and now we can go down to agenda item 3.7, which is another action item. This is our state fiscal year 2023 discretionary carry forward balance. This is the status and approval for use.
If we could open up the memo at your direction, ma'am, just so you can see the motion that we're proposing, or I'm sorry, the recommended action. And I would like to read this if that's okay, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
The Finance Committee recommends that the board approve continuing a contingency fund of $200,000, a legal contingency fund of $250,000, $200,000 for training for general education and special education, $50,000 for over the phone and website translation services from the discretionary account, and return the $200,000 for the research study of standards and curriculum alignment and research study of student safety and environment to this discretionary fund balances. So at your direction, ma'am, may we pull up the discretionary funds report so that I can orient you and the committee to the report and these particular requests?
That would be great. Thank you. That makes it very clear.
So just to emphasize, and this has been a pretty much perpetual type set aside, if you will, by the board. There is a contingency. That's the first project line that you're seeing there that I that we're recommending as part of the motion. Remain the $200,000, a legal contingency of $250,000. The next one was the over the phone and website translation services of $50,000. There has been some well, let's hang on just a second here. Yeah, so that one, and then the other one was that we return the research study of, it's a long one, sorry, research study of statements and curriculum alignment and research study of student safety and environment. That's that $200,000 of federal mineral lease money. So if the committee recommends that to the board and the board approves that, then that $200,000 would go back up into the FML carry forward balance column in the upper right-hand corner and increase the potential for use of funds along that line. So and then then an overall approval of the discretionary funds account, unless there's additional, and then there are additional ones to consider. So I'm not sure if you want to do that part first, that I just read, and then we have some other requested items that we can review, or do you want us to go to those right now?
No, I'd like to take care of the things that we have talked about and we maybe need to talk more about, but I'd like to move these highlighted items forward first with the motion. I do see some hands from Member Davis and Member Bogus. Is this pertaining to these items? Okay, go ahead, Member Vice Chair Davis.
Yeah, I was going to move that we remove the bottom section of research study standards and curriculum and safety environment and just remove it. So it looks like that was actually written into the recommended action.
It is.
So I'd like to move the recommended action then, please.
Okay.
And I'll speak briefly to
Did
it.
you want to just, Board Member Bogus, did you want to address this motion?
Yes, ma'am. I just had a question, and one of them was Member Davis's question. But as I look at the main chart, Chair, it appears as if this is a reallocation of discretionary funding. And maybe I'm incorrect, but the balance, the 7 million, is the same as yesterday. So I guess my question for Superintendent Jones is that understanding correct? And then I'll go from there.
Superintendent Jones?
Yes, so I believe, if I understand the question, I believe that's correct, but can we check in with Assistant Superintendent Jacobson as well? See if that's her understanding as well.
Assistant Superintendent Jacobson, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so that's correct. So what you see in the right-hand corner is your new, your closing balances for FY23. They have increased. If you look at FY23's discretionary, you will notice that there's a difference along with the added in tax delay funding. So these are the new balances. And now we're just kind of going through to see, these are the ones highlighted in yellow were projects that either didn't get started, other funding was utilized through the year and is no longer needed. And so we just need to know if you want to continue these balances moving forward into 24.
Thank you, ma'am. I have one small follow-up.
Yes, ma'am.
The over the phone and website translation services, that is a USBE service, not like a service that LEAs tap into, correct?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Deputy.
Board Member Bogus is correct. That would be internal and only to the USBE office.
That answers my questions, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I have
Sir.
I have an alibi. I missed the internal controls implementation, the $10,000. So if it pleases the chair and the committee, may we add that as well to the, that's my fault. I apologize. We want to keep that too, or recommend that the board approve keeping that. We'll spend that money on internal control implementation. We've been looking at some contracts. I apologize. I missed that. That's my fault.
Okay. Yes, we will definitely want to have that on the motion. Vice Chair Davis.
Yeah, I'm ready to make the motion.
Okay, go ahead. Soon as it's up.
And sounds like you may have to help me, Deputy Jones, with the language where to add in what you want me, the other one. You're muted.
If I may, Madam Chair.
Please.
The Finance Committee recommends that the board approve continuing a contingency fund of $200,000, a legal contingency fund of $250,000, the internal controls, if you'll add that in there. Yeah, perfect, Cami. Of 10, what is it called? What's the title? The internal controls. Oh gosh, we go back to the chart so I get the term.
Just say fund, the internal controls fund.
The internal controls fund of $10,000. That's the only addition, Madam Chair.
Okay, go ahead, Vice Chair.
Thank you. The Finance Committee recommends that the board approve continuing a contingency fund of $200,000, a legal contingency fund of $250,000, the internal controls fund of $10,000, $200,000 for training for general education and special education, $50,000 for over the phone and website translation services from the discretionary account, and return the $200,000 for the research study of standards and curriculum alignment and research study of student safety and environment to the discretionary fund balances. I'd like to speak briefly to the motion.
Go ahead.
I support the motion and I support the move of the $200,000 back into the fund for this stemmed out of a previous audit committee. And it was kind of a compromise language that came about from some people that wanted to focus on curriculum alignment and some people that wanted to do safety, and they kind of meshed the two. But since we've had legislation that has given money toward school safety and so I just think at this point, it's probably best. There's only one board member I think that might have some heartburn with this. I should have called her before this committee, but she can and we can talk prior to the full board if we need to make any adjustments. So I'm speaking in favor of the motion.
Thank you. Any other discussion towards this motion? All right, board members, go ahead and please vote. Okay, that looks like it's unanimous with Chair Moss absent.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Related to this agenda item as well, we have a second recommended action Our recommended action is that the finance committee recommends that the board approve using $280,000 of state discretionary funds for security guard services at the USBA office. This would be additional funding to continue the services that are already in place. 2 part-time staff to assist in the mailroom and with facility related needs, $75,000. And upgrades to the parking gate equipment of $75,000. If it
So
pleases, okay, if it pleases the chair, the warranty ran out on the parking gate equipment, so we need to replace it. Or if there's any other questions about these other 3, we're ready to answer those. If we could go back to the report, you can see that there's $280,000 of state funds available in the, yeah, if you could pull that up in the upper right hand corner. Yeah, make it bigger. So, oh wait, no, it's only 260,000. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I may,
Yeah,
that would, the 200,000 that they just voted to return would go to the state funds if.
No,
So
it wouldn't. No, I thought it would go to FML. Isn't it FML money? It says that on the chart. Look, scroll down to the $200,000. It's under the FML, so it would have to go back to FML, not state money.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought Deborah and I talked about that yesterday, but maybe not.
Okay, so what we need to do then, Madam Chair, is we need to just make the motion to use the entire $260,000 towards these purposes. Could we do that? Just amend the recommended motion to allow for to have the finance committee recommend that the board approve $260,000 for these purposes from the state funds.
Okay, the motion's already been made. Member Davis, can you?
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I just have a question because the total actually equals 280 from the parenthetical amounts. So do we need to make an adjustment there?
Well, what we could do is if you commit the 200, if you recommend to the board and the board commits the 260, I'm sure we could probably find the additional 20 if we need it.
And we can make an additional amendment in full board.
Yes.
But I feel like we have to, if this is going to go into backup to full board, because I want to know what they're voting for, which one for the moment should we reduce?
It looks like that Tammy reducing the parking gate. Is that someplace we can reduce?
Okay, so Madam Chair, what we could do is commit the whole 260,000 of state funds, and then the remaining balance to get to the 280 could come from the tax delay funds.
Okay.
Okay, that's what I think that's the best thing to do.
That's my fault. That's my fault.
Personally. Yeah,
Okay,
I think that's
sorry.
the best thing to do.
Yeah. And Madam Chair, I believe Board Member Bogus has her hand raised.
Yes, Board Member Bogus.
Thank you, ma'am. Superintendent Jones, I just want to be certain I understand. Is it costing us $75,000 to extend a warranty? Did I hear you say that?
Oh, no, I apologize, ma'am. The equipment, if I may, Madam Chair, the equipment for the parking gates, not only has the warranty ran out, but that equipment is obsolete as well. So with obsolete equipment and no warranty, it puts us in a position where we need to replace the entire equipment. Did I get that right, Cammie?
Okay.
That's correct, sir.
Right. So did I clarify for Board Member Bogus, Madam Chair?
Board Member Bogus, does that make more sense?
Yes, and I must have misheard the first time around.
No, you did not, ma'am. I said warranty. I left the part out about the obsolete equipment. That was my fault.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
And just quickly before I make the motion, when you say obsolete, we don't have these models anymore. We can't make a fast repair if needed. We can't do anything because, okay, got it. Okay, I'm
That's
ready.
correct, ma'am. Yes.
Chair, are you ready for me to make the motion?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
The Finance Committee recommends that the board approve using 260,000 of state funds and 20,000 in tax delay funds from the discretionary funds for security guard services at USBE office in the amount of 130,000, 2 part-time staff to assist in the mailroom with facility-related needs in the amount of 75,000, and upgrades to the parking gate equipment in the amount of 75,000.
Okay. Seeing no hands, board members, please vote.
Oh,
Okay, that looks like it's unanimous with 4 votes in favor. Chair Moss is absent.
Madam Chair, that concludes this particular agenda item, subject to any more questions or concerns from you or the Finance Committee members.
I'm not seeing any. We can proceed.
Madam Chair, if we could go to item number 8 and recognize Director Paula Plant of the School Land Trust section. She would provide the annual compliance report to the committee.
Thank you, Director Plant. Let's have that report.
Thank you. My computer says my background's still loading, so I don't know what that means, but
Great.
I can see that you're really short on time. And you had asked for a couple of other updates, but I think I'll just turn to, if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, to turn to Kara and have her do the required compliance report. Are you all right with that?
I am. That would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you. Kara, are you there?
You, Paula. Yeah, I am here.
Tammy, if you will pull up her slides. So it's the compliance review report. Thank you.
Welcome, Kara.
No, not that one. It's the up, go up one. Yeah, I think it's that one. Thanks. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Kira Bennett, Compliance Specialist for School Children's Trust. And I know we're short on time, so I'll jump in and try and make this brief to allow some time for questions. Cami, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I'll start with a quick recap of what our section does. The School Land Trust, or SLT program, is funded from Utah Trust Lands, and it promotes academic achievement for students through collaborative strategies and evidence-based practices. The format of this program encourages collaboration between parents, school administration, and employees in locally elected school community councils. The program is implemented locally under the supervision of each LEA and through school community councils. Schools get to make plans annually on how to spend the money, and annual requirements to receive funding are shown on this slide. Our section, the School Children's Trust, is responsible for administering training and compliance for the program. And today I'm talking about the compliance reviews with you that were done for the past year, and also our trajectory moving forward. Can you please go to the next slide? This slide has a consolidated timeline for what compliance for the program looks like right now, and when it took place in the past year. I'd like you to know all of the reviews are annual, and some of them include every participating school in the program, while others include a sampling of schools within each LEA. And I'll review those specific compliance reviews in the next few slides. Next slide, please. The October 20th items that are due for participation in the school are a council membership, a principal assurance, and a school website postings. A council membership is submitted by each school to let us know who's participating in their local council. A principal assurance assures us that those councils were formed by law, and the school website postings encourage parental involvement and provide updated public information about the school's participation in the program. We do not have much notable to report on. Any schools that didn't have those items turned in were notified, and we're working closely with our training specialist to provide more proactive resources for schools at the beginning of the year to prevent future late submissions. I did want to touch quickly on a USBE working group that took place where principals provided us feedback on some reporting burdens among programs, and one that came up in that working group was the website updating requirements. Based on that feedback, we've implemented a solution to alleviate the burdens for the several postings that are required as a part of that overall requirement. We are now allowing for a single URL to our reporting site, which updates automatically, and it satisfies many of their reporting requirements. And we've also come up with an optional solution that we've put out there for schools that have limited access to updating their website to utilize a Google Drive that is accessible and available to the public. And all of these solutions are currently being shared with schools to alleviate some of those burdens in the school year and the years moving forward. Next slide, please. We also did a final report review for the last completed year, which was 2020-2021 at this time. Those also have no significant findings. We have found that our final reports rely on the reporter to admit inconsistencies between our original plan and actual spending. So we found that these are going to be a better tool for doing follow-up for LEAs that undergo a more comprehensive review, which I will talk about in just a little bit. But rather than use these as a standalone report, we're finding they're a better follow-up tool. Next slide, please. Another review that goes on is the carryover review. Because the program is a trust, annually distributed funds are intended to benefit the current year's student beneficiaries. So that's why it's important to mitigate excessive carryover for this program. The carryover report and review looks at individual schools with excessive carryover, which is defined as greater than 10% of what their individual annual distribution was. We did allow for leniency for COVID years due to the difficulties in hiring staff and backordered supply chains for technology and consumables, which are common categories of spending for our program. And instead of jumping back into a review this year that had immediate consequences through a corrective action, we've used this year as a temperature gauge of where schools are at to provide LEAs with information that allows them to work with schools on proactively correcting that before corrective action is implemented. And in the next slide, please. For that carryover, we did review 994 schools. In this chart, it'll show that we look at three different situations for carryover. We look at the most recent year, the two most recent consecutive years, and 3 consecutive years. Only 9% of schools would have been in that corrective action category this year had it been in an actual corrective action implementation year. For the other 2 situations, we send a notice letter to let LEAs know where the schools are at. And then corrective action again would come after 3 consecutive years. This year, we let all LEAs know that it was a temperature gauge year, and we gave them the list of non-compliant schools and notified them that if they are able to spend all funding to the 23 to 24 year, it will knock their schools off that list and they get kind of a reset. Next slide, please. The next review we do is an upcoming plan review. This is where the School Children's Trust team reads every plan for every participating school in the state for how they will spend their funds for the next year. So in that case, that was for this current 23-24 year, kind of based on what we learned from the comprehensive review, which I keep alluding to, but I will go over next. We are a little more focused on preventing some common issues that would result in corrective action. In this upcoming plan review, we may have sent plans back for correction for any of the following reasons that you see on this slide. And what we do is we work closely with the LEAs to make sure that they get corrected so that they're starting out planning to use the money appropriately. Fortunately, at this time, there's a very small amount of schools that are still working on those plans. So the majority of the funding has gone out for the year. Next slide, please. The last review I'm going to touch on is it's called our full or comprehensive review for the program. It's done on the most recent complete year that we have actual expenditure data on. And so for the one that took place in last year, that would have been for 2020, 2021. A full review is a much deeper dive into kind of how successful LEAs are in implementing the program, with success being measured as consistency with rule and code. We perform this review by taking a sampling of school from selected LEAs and looking at several aspects of their implementation of the program. So this past year, we looked at plan writing, final reporting, unallowable program expenditures, school community council processes, and touched on internal controls. And then at the end of the review, we meet with them to go over any findings, recommended corrective action, and follow-up, which we're continuing now. Next slide, please. A quick note about how we decide on corrective action for the program. We look at the following decision-making process for unallowable expenditures. So we first ask, would the expense have been allowable had it been planned? If so, our focus is on training and plan writing to ensure the intent of how to spend the funds is clearly included in future plans. And then if the expenditure would not have been allowable, the school is given the opportunity to pay back the funds. So this year, there were a few schools that required fund paid back, but the amount was relatively low. And then for follow-up to the review, we allow the LEA to participate in deciding on how they intend to correct the issue on their own, since it's locally implemented. We also go over what appropriate documentation will be for their solution, what types of resources and training we at the USB can provide them to aid in that effort. And the feedback we've gotten so far is that the review that no one usually likes has been mostly a positive experience. So that was a good thing to hear back. And then the next slide, please. So now we've gone over kind of all the reviews that have taken place in the past year. I just want to touch on a couple of the additional changes that we're working on for efficiency purposes. The first one I already touched on is reducing burdens and reporting on the school website requirements. That is being shared and implemented this school year. We've also created a final report template that's received a lot of positive feedback that allows for easier and quicker final reporting for school administrators. It should alleviate issues with reporting when there's administration changes and just the general time it takes them for reporting on a prior year. So that's been a huge focus for us. And then the last notable change is for the full review. Our historical practice is that the full review take place once every 10 years. Unfortunately, that's mostly due to the manpower it takes to conduct and monitor the review. We're a huge team, section of 3. So the full review is arguably our most beneficial review, and just because of how much information it provides. And we've discussed the feasibility of cutting that time in half and providing the LEAs a review once every 4 to 5 years. We're kind of phasing that in right now. This year, we have increased the number of districts and charter LEAs that we're looking at. We haven't completely solved the problem of manpower. So as we're phasing this in, we're hoping to add another FTE to our team in the next year. And that kind of concludes our section's report on compliance. And if there's any questions, happy to answer them. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Specialist Bennett. I'm not seeing any questions. Nope, I'm not. It's a quiet group now. All right, thank you very much for providing that information for us. It was very helpful. And now we have a question. Vice Chair Davis.
Oh, it's on the next item. I'm just wondering what the likelihood is of, or what the problem would be of putting that to next month, since it's 12:15.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Deputy Jones.
Madam Chair, there's no problem moving it to the next. It's an information item. We do feel it's important that you are advised on it, but it can wait until next month.
Okay, that would be great then.
And I should also just add thank you to our trust lands presenters. You're really thorough and do a great job. So thanks for coming.
That's such an important program, and they are wonderful, aren't they? We're in good hands. And Board Member Straight saying, Yahoo. Did you want to give us a motion to adjourn, Board Member Straight?
Boo. Yeah, let's adjourn.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. It looks like we have until 1 o'clock. And then back to more meetings. So I'll see you all back in 45 minutes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Good job, everybody. Appreciate that.